Chapter 287. After being reminded by the waiter, Eric stood up, only to see that it was not only Murdoch, but also Elizabeth, who was holding her father's arm. The girl looked at him with a faint reproach. Obviously, Elizabeth also knew that Eric had chosen this place to embarrass her father. After all, she was a woman who had an intimate relationship with him. So Elizabeth's angry expression made Eric feel a little awkward. Since Eric had survived the crisis, Murdoch had proposed to meet with Eric more than once because of the lawsuit of Friends, and the production of Who Will Be a Millionaire, and The X-Files. After some hesitation, Eric agreed and refused the suggestion of going to the Murdoch family manor. He also did not invite Murdoch to his Malibu Point manor. Instead, he chose this restaurant on Sunset Boulevard in the downtown area. Not only that, but Eric also specifically asked someone to inform the paparazzi. As long as the fact that Murdoch took the initiative to contact him was exposed, then not only would the media think that Fox was taking the initiative to bow to Eric, but the other major film companies would definitely have bad ideas about Fox and treat Fox as a traitor to the alliance of the 7 major film companies. However, Murdoch was obviously not someone who was easy to deal with. Not only did he pull in his daughter, who had a somewhat different relationship with him, but he also pretended to be old and weak and needed someone to support him. After some slight exaggeration, Eric would definitely be portrayed as a young and inhumane person who would only give up if an old man personally came to beg him. Eric cursed helplessly in his heart. He really wanted to pick up a cup of coffee and pour it on Murdoch's head. This old man was not even 60 years old. As a transmigrator, Eric clearly remembered that Murdoch was still energetic in his 80s in his previous life. When Murdoch saw Eric's expression, there was an ambiguous smile on the corner of his mouth. He came to Eric and took the initiative to reach out his hand. "Eric, hello, we meet again." "Hello, Mr. Murdoch." Eric shook hands with Murdoch, and then looked at Elizabeth next to Murdoch. The girl rolled her eyes at Eric, but did not intend to greet him. "Liz, don't be so rude." Although Murdoch was very satisfied that Eric was humiliated in front of his daughter, he pretended to be a strict father on the surface. Elizabeth cast a dissatisfied look at her father. Although she was very dissatisfied with Eric's insistence on choosing this place for the meeting, she did not agree with her father's approach. She snorted and ignored the 2 men who were more scheming than a hornet's nest. She went straight to the table and sat down. She picked up the menu and flipped through it. Murdoch and Eric looked at each other awkwardly. "Mr. Murdoch, let's sit down too." In the end, it was Eric who spoke first. Murdoch nodded and sat down. The 3 of them ordered separately. After a moment of silence, Murdoch took the initiative to find a topic. "Liz, how's the movie you're preparing going?" Elizabeth, who had been folding the napkin in front of her with her head down, and had made up her mind not to speak, heard her father directly ask her. She had to say in a muffled voice, "It's all ready. The shooting will start at the end of the month." "Oh." Murdoch nodded and said, "I heard that the female lead is Jodie Foster. She seems to have good acting skills. This movie will definitely be wonderful." Elizabeth looked up at Eric and said, "Yes, someone recommended that I let Jodie Foster play the female lead. After the audition I thought she was good, so I agreed." Murdoch saw his daughter glance at Eric. Without thinking, he knew who recommended the female lead. He looked at Eric with a smile and said, "Eric, why don't Firefly distribute this movie?" Eric raised his eyebrows. Before he could say anything, Elizabeth glared at her father with dissatisfaction. "Dad," Eric said, "Mr. Murdoch, it doesn't matter if Firefly distributes it. It's just that our overseas distribution channels are not complete. I'm afraid it will limit the box office performance of this movie." Eric finally spoke the truth, but Murdoch took Eric's words as proof that he was not optimistic about the movie. He knew that Firefly's distribution capacity was limited. He thought that Eric did not want to use limited distribution resources on a movie that he was not optimistic about, so he tactfully refused. In fact, Murdoch himself had also read the script of The Silence of the Lambs, that his daughter was the producer of. After all, Elizabeth had invested nearly 20 million yuan in this movie. Except for the 6 million that Julia and Drew put together, all the other investments were borrowed from him, her father. Although Murdoch was very controlling and refused to hand over the power of News Corporation to his children, even though he was in his 80s in the parallel universe, he never mistreated his children in other aspects, such as finances. Elizabeth had found her life goal as a movie producer. Of course, Murdoch was happy to support her and readily took out the investment. As for whether it would make money or not, he did not consider it at all. He just regarded it as training his daughter's ability. Moreover, although Murdoch did not know much about movies, he knew that this script was an X-rated horror movie. This type of movie rarely achieved high box office sales, and it was difficult for it to be recognized by awards. Therefore, he just proposed to let Eric's Firefly distribute this movie. As for the purpose, it was still the same as before. He wanted to matchmake Eric and Elizabeth. Eric had now survived the biggest crisis. In the future, as long as he continued to fight steadily, he would definitely achieve great things in the media industry. If such a man could become his daughter's husband, it would definitely be of great benefit to News Corporation in the future. Moreover, when Eric was attacked some time ago, his daughter had quarreled with him. Therefore, Murdoch was sure that his daughter had feelings for Eric, and the degree was very deep. Since there was such a foundation, of course, they had to interact more to be able to bear fruit. Right? Thinking of this, Murdoch said to Eric with a smile, "Eric, it's just a horror movie." The new line originally specialized in releasing horror movies, so I believe that Firefly can handle it well. If it's really necessary to distribute it overseas in the future, Fox will definitely cooperate. Of course, Eric couldn't refuse Murdoch's good intentions. He turned to look at Elizabeth, only to see her lowering her head in a fit of pique. She folded and folded a napkin in her hand, and then tore it into pieces. "Liz, what do you think?" Eric asked tentatively. The woman pursed her lips and said, "You guys decide." "Then it's settled," Murdoch said with a smile like a parent before Eric and Elizabeth could say anything. Hearing Murdoch's words, Elizabeth didn't object, so Eric nodded. At this time, the waiter in the restaurant began to serve the three of them, and there was a brief pause in the conversation. When the waiter opened the red wine and poured it for the three of them, Murdoch took a sip of the wine and praised it a few times. Then he said to Eric as if nothing had happened, "Eric, you were born in 1970, right? Here comes the meat." Eric thought so in his heart, but on the surface, he showed a look of reminiscence. "Yes, I was born in London, but I came to the United States when I was 8 years old. I don't remember much about London. I should go back and take a look when I have time," Murdoch said with emotion. "I remember more than 30 years ago, Liz's grandfather died of a heart attack. I had to give up my studies and rush back to take over the family business. I was not much older than you. At that time, the newspaper industry in Sydney was controlled by 3 big families. When they saw that the Sunday Mail and the News were doing well, they wanted to take over these 2 newspapers. After I rejected their acquisition invitation several times in a row, they began to use all kinds of methods. Within a year, the newspaper company I ran received almost more accusations and lawsuits than the previous years combined. I even received death threats. But I did not give in. It took me 20 years to not only develop my newspaper company into the largest media group in Sydney, but I also bought the company of my former enemy." Although Murdoch saw that Eric was pretending as if nothing had happened, he knew that Eric was definitely listening to him, so he continued, "So, Eric, what you've been through during this period of time can't be any more normal. Therefore, I think you still have to look forward, don't always care about these things." Eric smiled and looked up. "Of course I'm looking forward, Mr. Murdoch. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here so peacefully today." "Then," Murdoch said tentatively, "drop the lawsuit regarding Friends. Also, there's no need to rush the X-Files, but Who Will Become a Millionaire, which was originally scheduled to be broadcast in March, is already at the end of February, and there's still no news from the entire team. Eric, I think you should hurry up. I think it would be a very good time to use a month of publicity from now on and launch the show after the Oscars at the end of the month." "I think so too." Eric swallowed the food in his mouth, wiped the corners of his mouth with a napkin, and stared at Murdoch. "However, Mr. Murdoch, you just said that after you became the #1 newspaper group in Australia, you bought your former enemy. So what should we do this time? Firefly's 5 movies at the end of the year will have a box office loss of no less than $100 million because of this storm. Firefly's loss will be no less than $30 million because of this, but I still don't know who my enemy is. Chapter 288. Eric, we all know about this. Why do you have to? Eric interrupted Murdoch's words and asked, who is the mastermind behind this? I want to know this. I know it's definitely not Fox. Not to mention that we have so many collaborations and Fox has obtained enough benefits. Even if you wanted to do it, you definitely wouldn't have chosen this time at the beginning of the year. The box office of Sleepless in Seattle has been greatly affected by this storm. So who instigated it? Murdoch was stunned and said, Eric, even if you know, what can you do? Although the method this time is a bit intense, it's also normal competition in the industry. Who is it? Eric asked coldly again. Elizabeth, who was just listening out of boredom, slammed the tableware in her hand on the table and glared at Eric. She said with dissatisfaction, Hey Eric, how can you talk to my father like that? He's an elder. The tense atmosphere was completely dispelled by the girl's low voice. Murdoch really wanted to pat his daughter's head and praise her. Sure enough, his daughter was born to side with her father. Of course, Elizabeth had grown up, and he couldn't do that anymore, so he just smiled and sipped the red wine. Eric looked at Elizabeth helplessly, but the girl glared back at him without showing any weakness. This little girl deserves a beating. Why is she interrupting a man's talk? Eric took a deep breath, softened his tone and said, Mr. Murdoch, the box office of Home Alone 2 is still very bright this time. Although it's not as good as the first one, the global box office is no problem for it to exceed $300 million. Also, according to Stu's current age, this sequel can be made at least 3 more times. What do you think? Michael Eisner. Murdoch blurted out without hesitation. Elizabeth looked at her father in astonishment. Isn't it too shameless to sell out your teammate? To think that I even helped you out of that situation just now. Glancing between the two hateful men, the girl puffed up her cheeks and drank the red wine in a fit of pique. At the same time, she swore in her heart that no matter what happened next, she wouldn't speak again. Eric, however, did not notice the girl's actions. His heart was filled with shock. During this period of time, he had thought about it more than once. The mastermind behind this could be Warner, Universal, Columbia, or even Paramount, which was not doing very well. His suspicion of Disney's Michael Eisner was the least. In fact, his suspicion of Disney's Michael Eisner was even lower than Fox's. After all, although he didn't have much contact with Michael Eisner had always shown great appreciation for him in front of him. Moreover, Disney was very sincere in their cooperation with Island Horror and Steel Magnolias. Seeing Eric's incredulous expression, Murdoch said, Eric, if you don't believe me, you can verify it. This matter has already passed. There is no need for me to lie. From the beginning, this matter was led by Michael Eisner, and he was in charge of many things. We just tried our best to cooperate. How could this be? Eric murmured to himself in disappointment. Murdoch thought for a moment and said slowly, Of the 3 outstanding managers who came out of Paramount, Barry Diller was the most pragmatic. He felt that as long as he did well, he would definitely be able to get enough returns. Therefore, I felt that he was also the most naive. That's why I felt at ease letting him take charge of Fox. Jeffrey Katzenberg, on the other hand, was most devoted to film production. He put most of his energy into film production, so he was not suitable to be the helmsman. As for Michael Eisner, he was the most unscrupulous. He would do anything to develop his career. Therefore, I feel that Michael Eisner will definitely have the greatest achievements out of the 3 of them in the future. However, I don't think I can control this person, so I've never thought of recruiting him under my command. Eric sighed and shook his head. I just think it's too surprising. For some reason, Murdoch couldn't help but defend Michael Eisner. Eisner just did what the most standard businessman should do. Yes, a typical businessman, Eric said with a self-deprecating smile. Then, Eric, about the Home Alone series. Firefly can directly sign a distribution contract with Fox for the next 3 Home Alone series. However, I won't be the director, but I will be the producer. Murdoch looked happy and worried at the same time. Eric, why don't you come in person? I'm a little tired of making 2 movies in a row, so I want to save time to make other movies. Moreover, the star of Home Alone is Stuart Runkle. So as long as the style of the movie remains the same, it won't be a problem for anyone to direct it. Eric answered. Although that was part of the reason, the main reason was that only 2 Home Alone series in his previous life had been a huge success. The third one was a flop because Macaulay Culkin had grown up and changed the lead actor. Although Eric had chosen the right actors and Stuart was only 9 years old and could continue filming, Eric didn't have any confidence in the future of the series. So he generously signed a distribution contract with Fox for the next 3 movies. When Murdoch heard Eric's explanation, he couldn't find a reason to refute it. Most Hollywood directors at Eric's level didn't like to make sequels, so he easily accepted Eric's explanation. Eric, although you don't want to direct it personally, I hope that you can continue to be in charge of the script, Murdoch said. Eric nodded. I will definitely participate in this. At this time, the 3 of them had finished their dinner. The waiter removed the cutlery and replaced it with coffee. Since Eric had gotten the answer he wanted, Murdoch and Eric started to discuss the Fox shows. After all, Firefly was a shareholder of Fox. Eric readily agreed to supervise the production of Who Will Be a Millionaire and guarantee that it would be broadcasted at the end of the month. In fact, Who Will Be a Millionaire was already well prepared. Even the question bank was almost ready. If it wasn't for this storm, it might have been released at the beginning of March. The situation with the X-Files was similar. The first episode should have been completed by now. Although Firefly's delay also violated the contracts signed by both parties, Fox originally thought that if Firefly gave in, they could take over the complete copyright of the shows. Therefore, they didn't react too much to Firefly's breach of contract. Now that the 2 sides had reconciled, Fox couldn't pursue this matter anymore. They just skipped over this matter in a few words. After the discussion, Murdoch took a few sips of coffee and asked nonchalantly, Eric, do you have a movie plan for this year? How many do you plan to make? Hearing this question, Elizabeth, who was originally absent-minded, also looked at him curiously. Eric slowly took a sip of his coffee. He thought for a moment and said, 2. One of them has already been confirmed, but the script is still in a deadlock. The price that the scriptwriter asked for is a little ridiculous. Plus, I haven't found the time to talk about the script yet. Is it the script about the ghost? Elizabeth couldn't help but interject. Eric looked at the girl curiously. Has this news spread so widely? Being stared at by Eric, the girl's face turned slightly red. She said, I heard that you are quite optimistic about this script, so I also asked around. Eric could tell at a glance that Elizabeth must have wanted to steal the script, but it certainly didn't succeed. As if her thoughts had been seen through. The woman became even more embarrassed, but she continued. But when I got someone to contact the screenwriter named Bruce Joey Robin, he said that the script had already been sold. Eric suddenly stood up in surprise and looked at Elizabeth. Sold? Yeah, didn't you buy it? Elizabeth looked up at Eric and asked in confusion. Sorry, I need to make a few calls, Eric said to the 2 of them. He picked up his mobile phone and walked to a corner not far away. Looking at Eric, who was standing not far away and dialing incessantly, Murdoch asked his daughter, Liz, what's the script? The girl looked at Eric's back and said to her father with some schadenfreude, It's a love story. I didn't get to see the full story, but I heard that it's about a bank employee who was murdered by his colleague and turned into a ghost. Then he protects his girlfriend and takes revenge. Anyway, that's about it. Murdoch looked at Eric, his eyes flashing. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, Eric returned to his seat with a disappointed look. Murdoch drank his coffee calmly and had no intention of speaking. Then Elizabeth said, Eric, who bought it? Michael Eisner. Eric said helplessly. The girl asked again, Then what are you going to do? What could he do? Eric could almost imagine that with Michael Eisner's shrewdness, he definitely wouldn't rashly let Disney film the script themselves. Instead, he planned to use it to cooperate with him. Chapter 289. But after hearing from Murdoch that Michael Eisner was the mastermind of the storm some time ago, Eric had no intention of compromising at all. At the same time, he made up his mind to think of a way to get the Justice Brothers' unrestrained melody tomorrow. As for the rest, he could do whatever he wanted. Anyway, he had a lot of good movies in his mind. It was a pity that Eric had planned to use this year to set up a special effects company and familiarize himself with the use of special effects in movies to prepare for Jurassic Park. And Ghost was undoubtedly a good test subject. He could use the wall-passing special effects and the Grim Reaper special effects in the movie to practice. Without this movie, many of Eric's original plans would be disrupted. Okay, Eric, it's a bit late now. Let's call it a day, Murdoch suddenly said. Eric didn't have much interest in continuing the conversation. He called the waiter over and handed him his credit card for the bill. Murdoch stood up and said, Eric, Liz is living in Beverly Hills for a while. I'm a bit old and want to go back directly. Can you help me send her back? Dad, I'll go back myself, Elizabeth said. You're a girl. What if you meet a bad guy? I think Eric won't mind sending you back, right, Eric? Murdoch looked at Eric with a smile. Eric looked at Elizabeth and said, If Liz is willing, of course I'm fine with it. That's it, Murdoch said. He called his assistant and bodyguard who had been waiting nearby and turned to leave. Because it was almost 10 o'clock, there weren't many people in the restaurant at this time. Only Eric and Elizabeth were left looking at each other. I don't need you to send me back. I'll go back myself, Elizabeth repeated stubbornly. Oh. Eric nodded and gestured for her to go ahead. Elizabeth, who had just stood up, glared at Eric with dissatisfaction and sat back down. She said, I've never seen such an ungentlemanly guy like you. Eric smiled. After paying the bill, he stood up and said to the girl, Okay, let's go. Elizabeth stood up reluctantly and followed Eric. The two of them got into Eric's car together. Are you still staying at Julia's place? Eric asked as he started the car. Yes, the two of us can live together for fun. Also, Julia is a partner of my film company. It's more convenient for the two of us to live together and discuss things. Speaking of which, I still don't know the name of your film company. Eric drove the car on the road and asked casually. Elizabeth said, TG Film Company. What does TG mean? Elizabeth opened her mouth and was about to reply when she remembered that if she explained, Eric would definitely ask who the three girls were. Then Drew would be exposed. Drew had more than once stopped her and Julia from telling Eric about it for the time being. The girl thought that she had more integrity than her unscrupulous father, and would not betray her teammates so easily. TG is TG, why are you asking so much? Okay. Eric did not pursue the matter and changed the topic. Oh yeah, about the Silence of the Lambs. Did you not tell your dad clearly? What did he say? Elizabeth asked curiously. For example, I'm more optimistic about this script. The girl blinked a few times. My dad didn't ask. Then when The Silence of the Lambs is released, some people will regret it so much that they won't be able to eat, Eric said with a smile. Now that you mention it, I remember now. You're really despicable. You actually secretly bought the rights to Golden Jade Alliance from Fox. I heard that this movie has sold more than 1 million videotapes. My dad called Barry Diller and scolded him. Some executives at Fox lost their jobs. Eric shrugged. This is business. Besides, you guys bought it voluntarily. I didn't steal it. The girl was dissatisfied. We haven't signed the contract yet. Don't think that I'll definitely let your small company distribute The Silence of the Lambs. Eric stopped the car at a red light and casually looked out the window. Up to you. Besides, it might not sell well. Maybe you'll cry when the time comes. If that's the case, I won't be the only one crying, Elizabeth said. Seeing that Eric did not respond, the girl continued. Let Firefly distribute it in North America, but I want 35% of the profits. I'll let Fox handle it overseas. 20%. Eric immediately bargained with a smile. The girl raised her fist and punched Eric on the shoulder. 35%, or I'll give it to Fox. How about 21%? F***ck off. Just as the girl was about to speak again, A silver convertible behind Eric's car started honking crazily. A few young people in the car shouted crazily, "Hey, the light's green. Hurry up and drive." Eric looked at the rearview mirror helplessly and slowly stepped on the accelerator. When the silver convertible passed by, a few young people shouted provocatively at Eric's car window. Eric ignored them and continued driving at his own speed. The silver convertible quickly overtook them. Eric originally thought that the other party would drive away, but the other party quickly slowed down and started to run parallel with Eric's car. "Hey, beauty, how about we go for a ride in our car?" A young man with an afro asked Elizabeth, who was in the front passenger seat. Eric glanced out the window and pressed the button to raise the window. Elizabeth did the same, but her small mouth said, "You're really weak. The lady next to you is being harassed, but you don't even dare to fight back." Eric glanced at the girl and said, "If you were bitten by a dog, would you bite back? You are so vulgar." Elizabeth angrily turned her head to the side and decided not to pay attention to Eric. Eric did not take it to heart and focused on driving. Although Eric had raised the window, the young people in the convertible still refused to leave. They sped up and slowed down, circling around Eric's car, and from time to time made all kinds of provocations. Eric looked out the window. He was not far from Elizabeth's house, so he decided to ignore them. Chapter 290. A few minutes later, the convertible car that had fallen behind had just overtaken them. Before it could change lanes, another large off-road vehicle turned diagonally from another intersection. Eric immediately stepped on the brakes. The driver of the convertible car on the other side also frantically turned the steering wheel. Although he avoided a head-on collision with the off-road vehicle, the entire car also lost control. It rushed directly to the curb and hit a transformer box. At the same time, a series of sparks splashed out while making a muffled sound. The lights in many houses on both sides of the road dimmed almost at the same time. The driver of the off-road vehicle also realized that the car accident had happened. He only slowed down the car for a while. The owner of the car probably struggled for a short time in his heart, but he quickly chose to speed up and leave. Eric opened the door and looked at the several young men in the convertible car, who seemed to have all fainted. He spread his hands at Elizabeth and said earnestly, "See, this is retribution. I told you a long time ago that driving is dangerous and harming others. Stop joking around, call 911. The woman glared at him and took a step forward. She seemed to want to see the situation of the few people in the car, but when she saw the sparks, she immediately stopped. Although the transformer box seemed to be damaged, and there was a power outage around, no one could guarantee that there would not be any leakage. Although Elizabeth would not leave them in the lurch, she would not joke about her own life either. Moreover, Elizabeth did not have much sympathy for the young men in the convertible car. Although it was late at night and there was less traffic, it was still very dangerous to race on the road of Beverly Hills at this time. Since these young men wanted to have a good time and completely disregarded the safety of others, it could be said that they were reaping what they sowed. Eric also stood in the distance and looked at the situation not far away before he turned around and took out his mobile phone to dial 911. After the call was connected, he quickly described the situation. Anyway, the responsibility of the accident was not on the two of them. These nearby cameras could prove that they were not guilty. Therefore, the two of them did not leave immediately and waited patiently. After chatting for a while, Elizabeth suddenly thought of something. She looked around at the darkened houses and suddenly said to Eric, "Julia's villa is not far ahead. It may also have a power outage." Eric comforted him. "It's okay. I think it will be fixed soon." As a world-famous wealthy district, Eric didn't believe that the community property management would put a power outage on hold until the next day. If they didn't do anything, Eric could imagine that if they encountered a more serious owner, they might receive complaints the next day. It was even possible that they would be sued. Americans always attached great importance to the rights they should have. Once they felt that their rights had been violated, it was common for them to go to court. Rich people who didn't lack money especially seemed to like lawsuits. The two of them waited patiently. After a minute or two, the police car still had not arrived. However, a young man in his 20s walked out of a nearby villa. He narrowed his eyes and looked around carefully. When he saw Eric and Elizabeth, he mumbled something and walked towards them. Under the street lamp, the young man looked extremely dispirited. His hair was messy and his beard was unshaven. Even without getting close, Eric and Elizabeth could tell that the other party was drunk from his swaying body. As the wealthy district with the most concentration of Hollywood stars, Beverly Hills had countless parties almost every night. Therefore, it was not surprising to see a drunkard on the road in the middle of the night. If they were patient enough, they might be able to pick up the corpse and take it back after waiting on the street for a few nights. The young man staggered in front of Eric and Elizabeth. When he noticed Elizabeth, who was dressed fashionably, he couldn't help but whistle at Elizabeth. Then he looked at the miserable convertible that crashed into the transformer and the people in the car. His voice was a little hoarse as he shouted gloatingly, Wow, there was a car accident. It seems to be very serious. Oh, are they dead?" Elizabeth frowned and leaned towards Eric. She completely ignored the other party's words. Instead, she was slightly alert. Eric agreed and leaned against the car. He had no intention of paying attention to this sloppy young man. Seeing that he was elegantly ignored, the young man felt a little bored. He walked around a few times but had no intention of leaving. Instead, he leaned forward and carefully looked at Eric under the light. Then he clapped his hands as if he had discovered some important secret. He said with a surprised expression, "Wow, you seem to be wait, let me think. Oh, the director of Dark War, his name is Eric Williams, right?" Eric nodded slightly without commenting. The young man immediately looked at Elizabeth, who was beside him. "Is this the newcomer that you intend to promote?" "Hee, not bad, but she's not as beautiful as that Nicole Kidman. That girl, those two long legs, when they clamp a person, TSK. I've also picked up a few similar girls before. Unfortunately, they're not as beautiful as that Nicole Kidman." The feeling of waiting was a little boring. With nothing to do, Eric heard the young man's words and realized that this was obviously a kindred spirit. Just as he was about to open his mouth to talk nonsense, a small hand reached out to his waist, twisted a piece of meat, and twisted it fiercely. "What's going on now?" Eric felt a sharp pain, but at the same time, he felt a little confused. Everything had been fine since the beginning of the meal. Why did it suddenly hurt? Eric took a deep breath and slapped Elizabeth's small hand away. He rubbed his waist and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Elizabeth snorted coldly. She raised her chin slightly and turned her head away. She had no intention of explaining at all. However, this action was seen by the young man. The young man showed a smirk and lowered his voice. "What a fierce girl. Eric, I think such a little girl needs to be taught a lesson. Do you want me to teach you a few moves?" "Ugh, that. No need. I prefer to make women fall in love with me gently." Eric endured the smell of alcohol spewing out of the young man's mouth. He tightly grabbed Elizabeth's wrist that reached out again, and began to talk nonsense to the young man. When Elizabeth heard Eric say this, she suddenly snorted a few times in dissatisfaction. However, she did not have the intention to sneak an attack on Eric again. She let him gently hold her small hand, seemingly without any intention of taking it back. After a while, the police car, fire engine, and ambulance finally arrived one after another. Eric briefly explained the situation to the police officer. The police officer obviously recognized Eric's identity, so he did not bother too much. He took a statement on the spot and let Eric and Elizabeth leave. Eric got into the car and waited for the girl to sit in the front passenger seat before starting the car. He looked at the wrecked convertible again and heard the drunk young man gesticulating with his hands and feet. "Sir, this has nothing to do with me. I don't know those guys. Yes, I drank a little, but I didn't drive. I live in that villa. Look, that villa, the tallest one. My parents left it for me. Sigh, it's a pity that they only left me these things. Everything else is... Oh, I digress. Here, it's like this. I was going to sleep, but my headlamp was inexplicably broken. I was about to fix it when the power went out." Julia's small villa was not far from the scene of the accident. The car arrived after a minute or two of driving. As Elizabeth expected, there was also a power outage here. The villa was dark. Eric stopped the car and looked at Elizabeth in the passenger seat. Then you go in. I'm going back. The girl sat in the passenger seat. She hesitated for a moment before whispering. Julia went to San Francisco. She said that she might not come back today. There's no one in the villa now. I'm afraid of the dark. The girl stammered like a mosquito. Eric thought for a moment and said, Then I'll send you in. Okay. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment before nodding gently. The two entered the villa together in the dark. Both of them stood in the dark living room. Eric asked, Do you know where there are flashlights or candles? Elizabeth shook her head in the dark. I'm not sure, but Julia always likes to put some small things in the compartment under the TV. Oh, Eric responded and said, Go and look for it. You go. The girl's voice trembled slightly in the dark. Eric said, I don't know where it is. I've never been here. Liar, Elizabeth said. Don't think that I don't know about your relationship with Julia. In the dark, Eric did not show much guilt. He nodded and said, I don't deny this. Julia and I did do it a few times, but I really haven't been here. She just moved here not long ago. Elizabeth heard Eric's explanation. She was silent for a moment before continuing. Well, the TV is near the east wall. Forget it, let's go together. Eric searched in the dark and found the girl's small hand. He said, Lead the way. Elizabeth subconsciously struggled, but she didn't use too much strength. Instead, she obediently pulled Eric in the direction of the TV. After a few steps, she suddenly felt that she had tripped over something, and her body suddenly fell forward. Eric felt the girl pulling him, and hurriedly pulled in the opposite direction, and the girl fell into his arms. You bastard, you must have planned this beforehand. Elizabeth scolded softly in the dark after an unknown amount of time. Eric's voice also sounded. He said, If you don't agree, I'll leave now. Elizabeth raised her hand and punched Eric a few times. Chapter 291. Julia went to San Francisco to participate in a business event during the day. Because the event ended early, she did not stay in San Francisco and rushed back by plane. In comparison, San Francisco and Los Angeles were less than 2 hours of flight time. Moreover, Julia was also a homesick person. However, after returning to Los Angeles, everything was perfect. After running around for a day, Julia, who was very tired, fell asleep early today. At the same time, it was impossible for her to know about the power outage in the villa. Then, after sleeping for some time, she felt her bedroom door creak and someone walk in. Julia also heard the noise in a daze. However, ever since the two became best friends, it wasn't like Elizabeth hadn't slept with her before. So, Julia thought that Elizabeth was here to take up space again. She didn't mind and even took the initiative to move to the other side to make room for Elizabeth. Then she realized the difference. The morning sun shone through the curtains into the bedroom. Elizabeth opened her eyes in a daze and looked around. Only then did she realize that she was in Julia's room. A string of memories flooded into her mind. The girl sat up abruptly, but she quickly remembered that Julia went to San Francisco yesterday. Fortunately, I have been persuading Julia to leave that guy. If she finds out that I'm with Eric, she will laugh at me to death. Elizabeth thought happily. Seeing that Eric was no longer beside her, and her clothes were neatly folded on the chair, she slipped into the bathroom with her clothes. After a long time, Elizabeth put on her clothes and walked downstairs barefoot. Before she reached the stairs, Elizabeth heard a sound from the kitchen. At the same time, a faint fragrance of food wafted in the air. A sweet smile appeared on Elizabeth's face. This bastard still has a conscience. This time he did not slip away after eating. He even knows to make breakfast for me. Thinking back to that time, Elizabeth clenched her teeth in hatred. How could that guy do that? He slipped away. What a bastard. Well, since you did so well today, I'll forgive you, Elizabeth thought in her heart. She subconsciously tidied her hair and touched her face. She recalled how she looked in the bathroom just now. After confirming that there were no flaws, Elizabeth walked down the stairs. She looked around. There should have been something left on the floor where the two of them fell last night, but at this time, The living room was very clean, and there was no mess caused by the small incident last night. It seemed that the guy had already cleaned up after waking up. This made Elizabeth feel a little strange. Cleaning, he didn't seem to like doing this kind of thing too much. Thinking of this, Elizabeth became nervous again. She walked through the living room and arrived at the kitchen door in a few steps. Looking at Julia, who was busy in her pajamas, with her back facing her, Elizabeth was stunned for a while. Something seemed to have gone wrong again. It seemed that her premonition was wrong again. The figure in the kitchen was not that guy, but Julia. Although her mind was in a mess. No, this must be my illusion. Elizabeth lamented in her heart. She reached out and gently pinched the back of her other hand. When the pain came, she was sure that this was not a dream, nor was it a hallucination. Realizing a certain possibility, Elizabeth even felt her scalp tingle. She clearly remembered that she had just woken up in Julia's bedroom. Moreover, with Julia's personality, she definitely would not have gone to her room to sleep last night. She stood in a daze at the kitchen door for a long time, until Julia felt her presence and turned around. Elizabeth carefully looked at Julia's expression and stammered, "That Julia, that? What's wrong?" Julia gently waved the spatula in her hand, and asked curiously when she saw Elizabeth's stammering appearance. There did not seem to be any strange expression on her face. Elizabeth made a few gestures with her hands in front of her, and finally sorted out some thoughts. She mustered the courage to ask, "That Julia yesterday, when did you come back yesterday?" "Yesterday afternoon, but it was already a little late when I rushed back. I just took a shower and went to sleep." Julia turned around again, and cracked an egg into the hot oil pan. A strong sense of uneasiness arose in Elizabeth's mind. She repeated with a last trace of expectation, "Yesterday afternoon?" "Yes." Julia turned her head to look at her and nodded. Elizabeth scratched her hair a few times frantically, and repeatedly looked at Julia's expression. She thought to herself, could it be that everything I experienced yesterday was just a dream? Impossible, impossible. She was 200% sure that it was definitely not a dream. How could something so clear be a dream? After hesitating for a while, Elizabeth mustered the courage to ask, "That Julia last night, where did you sleep?" "It's right next to you," Julia said indifferently. She picked up the small bottle on the kitchen counter, and gently sprinkled some salt on the fried egg, as if what she had just said was as normal as what she had eaten for lunch yesterday. This somewhat strange reaction made Elizabeth sluggish for more than a minute before she slowly burst out cursing. "What the F***ck?" As if she did not hear Elizabeth's frantic cursing, Julia placed the cooked fried egg on a plate, and turned her head to ask, "Liz, do you want to eat breakfast?" If Eric's behavior made Elizabeth crazy, then Julia's current reaction made Elizabeth feel a little broken and horrified. If she encountered such a situation, Elizabeth was sure that even if she did not make a fuss, she would definitely not be as calm as Julia was making breakfast in the kitchen, as if nothing had happened. "Julia, can you still eat breakfast now?" "Why not?" Julia replied. Seeing that Elizabeth did not respond, she only gave herself a portion of breakfast, and then carried it to the dining room. Elizabeth also walked in and watched Julia sit at the dining table. She then picked up the cutlery and ate the bread and fried egg one bite at a time. Just like that, she ate one bite at a time. Then after a few minutes, Julia at the dining table stuffed food into her mouth while tears flowed down her cheeks. "Liz, I'm sick, I can't be cured, sob sob." Seeing Julia's heartbroken look, Elizabeth suddenly forgot to ask about what happened last night. She thought that Julia had some terminal illness and did not have much time left, but after comforting her, Elizabeth found out what happened to the girl. How could he do this? Let's go and find that bastard. If he doesn't give us an explanation, this matter will not be over. After holding it in for so long, Julia finally revealed the biggest secret in her heart to another person, and she seemed to feel much better. She reached out and grabbed Elizabeth. "Liz, don't be like this. Actually, this has nothing to do with Eric." "Julia, it's already like this, and you're actually defending him. You disappoint me." Julia shook her head. "No, I talked to him about this matter, and he also hopes that I can recover. After so long, I also thought that I had recovered long ago, until last night. He hit me twice, and then I realized that not only did I not have any thoughts of resistance in my heart, but it was as if I had been looking forward to it for a long time. Hit a mosquito? Elizabeth's mouth twitched as she recalled the details of last night. Julia blushed and nodded. Then what do you plan to do? Elizabeth asked. Julia shook her head. I don't know. If only I knew what to do. I think you should talk to Eric again. Julia's head immediately shook like a rattle drum. No, I don't dare to see him now. If I see him, then I'll go look for him. Elizabeth suddenly stood up, but Julia pulled her back again. Don't go, okay? It'll only make things awkward for us. Elizabeth thought for a while, then sat down dejectedly. The two of them leaned on the sofa and were silent for a while before Elizabeth said, Actually, Julia, this is still my fault. If only I didn't bring him back. Julia took out a tissue from the tissue box in her arms and wiped her face. When she heard Elizabeth's words, she thought for a while and couldn't help but burst out laughing. She teased, You're really something. You can say anything. Even I blush when I hear it. Julia's words immediately brought up the embarrassing incident last night that had just been forgotten. Elizabeth's expression changed a few times. Although she didn't say much in the bedroom yesterday, now that she thought about it, it was really embarrassing. Moreover, Julia heard everything. You clearly saw us go in. Why didn't you run away? I wanted to. That guy grabbed me and hit me twice. I had no strength left. I see through you. You must have wanted to be like him. That's why you were so obedient. Julia immediately shook her head. I didn't. You're still quibbling. Elizabeth immediately pounced on Julia and pinned her on the sofa. Of course, Julia was not to be outdone. She also fought back. Soon, the two women's clothes were in a mess, and their faces were red as they panted. Then they realized that the two of them were hugging each other tightly on the sofa. Their faces were less than 5 centimeters apart, and they could clearly distinguish each other's breaths. Julia, you went to San Francisco yesterday. Did you see that? Julia blinked rapidly with a puzzled expression. I heard that many residents in San Francisco openly hang rainbow flags in front of their houses. After Elizabeth said that, she saw Julia's expression change a few times. Then she couldn't help but get excited. Chapter 292. After Eric and Murdoch met on Sunset Boulevard. Although Murdoch pretended to put on a show in public, Eric was not unprepared. He had asked someone to disclose some news to the paparazzi. Therefore, early the next morning, a lot of specious news appeared in many newspapers. For a time, Fox would continue to distribute all the films directed by Eric for the next 3 years. Fox would implement an equity exchange with Firefly to ensure long-term cooperation between the two sides. Or Fox would cooperate with Firefly to produce the special effects blockbuster, Jurassic Park. Although these news were not a big deal in the eyes of ordinary people, it caused a strong sensation in the Hollywood circle. There was no doubt that many people in the Hollywood circle who knew the inside story of the previous storm realized that Fox had completely betrayed the alliance of the 7 major film companies and sided with Firefly. In fact, as an outsider, Fox and News Corporation had always been rejected by the local forces in North America. At this time, many people did not seem to be surprised that they had betrayed the alliance. After this storm, there was no doubt that Fox would be the biggest beneficiary, except for the safe and sound Firefly. Next, although Fox tried to clarify and repeatedly said that Fox did not have much cooperation with Firefly, the TV series The X-Files and Who Will Be a Millionaire, which were originally suspended, were quickly restarted. There was no doubt that Fox and Firefly had reached some cooperation agreements. In this case, the alliance of the other major film companies, who had already given up on suppressing Firefly, quickly collapsed. At the same time, in order to make up for the rift between the two sides, several major film companies expressed goodwill to Firefly, hoping to reach some cooperation with Eric. After all, last year, the total box office in North America for the whole year just exceeded the 5 billion mark, and a series of movies related to Eric accounted for nearly 1/5 of the total box office. Therefore, no one doubted Eric's strength in the film industry. Since suppression did not work, cooperation was undoubtedly the best way to achieve a win-win situation. Robert, the selling point of this movie isn't the pure sex scenes. Pure love can only bring people a simple and short wormhole, but when love is combined with bloody violence, the fishing net of humans will become extremely strong. This is the biggest selling point of the script of Basic Instinct. You should have read the script. If the scene at the beginning of the script is just a creation scene, perhaps the audience will only whistle and exclaim. However, when the originally passionate love suddenly transforms into a bloody massacre, the audience's adrenaline will be quickly stimulated, and they will be unknowingly sucked into the story. In the small meeting room of Firefly, Eric was introducing the script of Basic Instinct to Robert Shea. Originally, when Eric presented the script, Robert Shea expressed a strong interest. However, when Eric later said that he would not sign his name on the script, Robert Shea became suspicious again. After reading the script, Robert Shea understood that Eric did not sign his name on the script for the sake of his own public image. After all, once the script of Basic Instinct was made into a movie, it would definitely attract a lot of controversy. However, this reason did not completely make Robert Shea feel at ease. During the negotiation process with Eric last year, he had fought hard to get the opportunity to independently direct 2 big-budget movies this year. If he messed it up, it would be difficult for him to ask to direct a big-budget movie in the future. He could only obediently be responsible for the distribution of the movie. Therefore, although the script of Basic Instinct was personally written by Eric, when Eric expressed that he did not want to have anything to do with the movie, Robert Shea became worried. Based on Eric's previous response to The Storm, and the recent methods of breaking up the alliance of the 7 major movie companies, Robert Shea did not treat Eric as a young man who was not even 20 years old. Therefore, he did not dare to completely take over Eric's script. This could be a trap set by Eric. If the movie was a flop, it was hard for him to imagine that Eric would not push the blame to him. After all of Eric's scripts had sold well. After thinking for a while, Robert Shea found another reason and said, "Eric, I think that after this movie is produced, there will definitely be a lot of trouble in the rating. You just said that the production cost of this movie is over $20 million USD. If it is classified as an NC-17 movie, we will definitely lose everything. We just confronted the 7 major movie companies for a while. It's hard to guarantee that they won't choke us in this regard. After all, everyone knows that the movie rating committee is controlled by the 7 major movie companies." Eric listened to Robert Shea's insincere words and understood what the other party was worried about. He sighed in his heart and did not intend to persuade him anymore. Since Robert was unwilling, he would just let Jeffrey handle the movie. This way he could intervene without any scruples and prevent the movie from deviating too much from its previous life. Just as he was about to speak, the mobile phone in Eric's right hand suddenly rang. The ringtone was unusually ear-piercing in the conference room, where only the 2 of them were present. Robert Shea did not show any displeasure. He gestured to Eric and picked up the coffee in front of him. Eric hesitated for a moment before reaching out to grab the mobile phone. At the same time, he secretly prayed that it was not a debt collector. That night, Eric did something out of line again. Although it was very exciting at the time, Eric had no choice but to flee early in the morning. Otherwise, if the 2 women woke up early in the morning and found out about it, it was hard to guarantee that they would not do something terrible in their agitation. By leaving in advance, he could also give the 2 women some time to calm down. However, things went beyond Eric's expectations. He originally thought that Elizabeth and Julia would come to him to denounce him that day. However, it had already been 3 days, and there was no news from Elizabeth and Julia. Not only did Eric not feel relieved, he felt even more uneasy. Eric gestured to Robert Shea and walked out of the conference room with the phone. He only picked up the phone when he reached the end of the corridor. Chapter 293. After a while, Eric returned to the conference room with his mobile phone. Robert Shea also put down the coffee cup in his hand and looked at Eric inquisitively. "It's Michael Eisner," Eric explained with a hint of lightness in his tone. "Did he want to invite you to talk?" Robert Shea raised his eyebrows slightly and asked. He also knew that the previous incident was caused by Michael Eisner behind the scenes. Eric nodded and sat down on the chair again. Yes. Did you agree? Robert Shea asked curiously. There's no harm in listening to what he has to say. Anyway, I have nothing to do tonight, Eric said as he put the mobile phone beside his hand and continued. Robert, since you don't want to take over Basic Instinct, pick a script as soon as possible. It's already March. If you don't confirm the project, it'll probably be hard to make it in time for the summer. Robert saw that Eric was no longer forcing the script for Basic Instinct on him. At the same time, he was slightly relieved. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a little conflicted. After all, this was a script written by Eric himself. However, he quickly adjusted his emotions and said, I understand. I've collected 6 more scripts these days. I'll get my assistant to pass them to you later. Help me take a look. Eric shook his head. No need. I think it's better for you to pick it yourself. I can't guarantee that the movie will be a success. When you've picked the script, just pass it to me for my signature. Robert Shea was stunned. He immediately understood that Eric was ready to completely let go. Then, the success or failure of the movie in the future would have nothing to do with Eric. He would definitely have to take full responsibility. However, Robert Shea wasn't someone who didn't take responsibility. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded. Then, I'll pick the script as soon as possible. After work, Eric drove back to Malibu. However, his destination wasn't his own Sharp Corner Manor. Instead, it was Michael Eisner's mansion in Malibu. Eric, I'm glad you're here. Please come in. As soon as the servant led Eric into the mansion, Michael Eisner welcomed him with a smile. Hello, Mr. Eisner. Eric smiled politely and shook hands with Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner didn't mind Eric's coldness at all as he said with a smile. Eric, I've specially invited a famous French chef to personally cook tonight's dinner. Let's go in. Eric nodded and followed Michael Eisner directly to the dining room. During the entire dinner, apart from the servants who appeared from time to time, there were only Michael Eisner and Eric in the dining room. Michael Eisner skillfully introduced the exquisiteness of the French dishes to Eric. After the meal, he even specially invited the French chef who was wearing a tall chef's hat. The 3 of them took a picture together. While secretly admiring Michael Eisner's patience, Eric also quietly enjoyed the dinner. After all, the initiative was in his hands now. After dinner, Michael Eisner brought Eric into his study. After the servant served the coffee and left, Michael Eisner said, Eric, since it's over, I think we should talk about cooperation. A mocking smile finally appeared on Eric's lips. Cooperate? Michael Eisner said with a smile. Yes, cooperation, Eric. There are no eternal enemies in this world, only eternal interests. Although this is Britain's diplomatic strategy, I think it can be used between companies. There are no eternal enemies, only eternal interests. Eric shook his head and smiled a few times. Then he said, Mr. Eisner, if you have a choice to cooperate with your friends or neutrals, would you still cooperate with your enemies? Of course not, Michael Eisner said. However, Eric, do you think Firefly has friends in Hollywood? Although you have a good cooperation with Fox, believe me, as long as there is a chance, Murdoch will definitely stab Firefly in the back. I know this too. Therefore, I will try not to give Mr. Murdoch this chance. At the same time, for an enemy who has already stabbed me in the back, I will not give him a chance, Eric said casually as he picked up his coffee. When Michael Eisner heard Eric say this, he still smiled and said, Eric, I think you must know something and I won't deny it. So, I think we should reconcile. Reconcile? Eric raised his head and asked, How do we reconcile? Michael Eisner said with faint confidence, How about the script for Ghost? Eric shook his head without thinking. Mr. Eisner, I don't lack a script, so I don't want to cooperate with Disney. If I don't have Ghost, then I'll just choose something else. Moreover, I guarantee that Disney won't be able to produce the Ghost that I already have in mind. If you guys produce this movie, you might be able to make a small profit, but it definitely won't become a classic. It's even harder to say if it can sell well. No, Eric, I don't think you fully understand what I mean. I mean, Disney will transfer the script for Ghost to you, and then we will reconcile. How about that? Eric finally raised his head in surprise and saw Michael Eisner's confident gaze. Then Eric thought of another question. Mr. Eisner, I think Disney must have spent a lot of money to buy the script for Ghost. Perhaps they also promised Bruce Joey Robin a share of the dividends, right? Yes. Michael Eisner nodded. $1 million in cash and a 3% share of the North American profits. Eric calculated for a moment. According to the results of his previous life, this sum of money added up to more than $3 million. Perhaps, this amount of money was nothing for future profits. But for Disney, who didn't know the outcome, this price was simply outrageous. Seeing Eric remain silent, Michael Eisner said, Eric, Disney is very sincere. So as long as we reconcile, I will transfer the script to Firefly for free. After seeing the news that Murdoch took the initiative to contact Eric, Michael Eisner decisively decided to reconcile with Eric. After all, as he said at the beginning, there were no eternal enemies, only eternal interests. Moreover, Michael Eisner originally did not intend to use the script of Ghost as the price to reconcile with Eric. However, some time ago he asked several well-known directors under Disney to take the script of Ghost for research. Then the project plans provided by these people, which were now in his hands, did not satisfy Michael Eisner. Chapter 294. What's more, in the contract between Disney and Bruce Joey Robin, Eric had to be the director of the movie. If the appointed directors could come up with a satisfactory proposal, Michael Eisner did not mind breaching the contract and forcing the directors under Disney to take over the script. But things did not go as planned. So Michael Eisner made the decision that day. After all, if Disney forced themselves to produce the movie, the final result would be mediocre. It would be better to let Eric produce the script. After all, Eric still had a very strong box office guarantee. After sitting in the study for a long time, Michael Eisner took out the proposal document from the folder and threw it into the trash can next to him. He then got up and left the room. In mid-March, after more than a month of investigation, the Federal Trade Commission announced the results of the investigation into Firefly and UTA's alleged monopolization of the industry. Because of the lack of support from the major companies behind the scenes, coupled with a series of public pressure, the Federal Trade Commission did not punish Eric too harshly. In addition to requiring Eric to sell all of his shares in UTA, there was a symbolic fine of $1 million. After the results of the investigation were released, Eric did not raise any objections. He quickly paid the $10 million fine and sold 90% of UTA's shares to ICM, one of the three major Hollywood agencies, for $30 million. Almost at the same time, Sony Pictures and Firefly also reached a settlement on the project share of Dark War. A week later, Sony settled all of the $88 million share of Dark War. As for the other three lawsuits Eric was involved in addition to the withdrawal of the two lawsuits, the other lawsuit about the Malibu Cornerland was also dropped due to lack of evidence. Firefly and Fox's TV series The X-Files had also started filming. Another show, Who Will Be a Millionaire, had been promoting since the beginning of March. Although someone in charge of the show suggested that the first episode of the show could invite some famous stars as guest contestants, this suggestion was rejected by Eric. Inviting celebrities could attract some attention, but it would also make the show lose its sense of reality. After all, the selling point of the show was to get rich overnight. Therefore, the show still used the method of national auditions and set up registration points all over North America. Next, Disney quickly announced that they would cooperate with Firefly to release Eric Williams' new film, Ghost. At this point, the 2-month-long storm against Eric and Firefly that started on the first day of the new year had completely disappeared. After a series of awards prelude, on March 26, 1990, the 62nd Academy Awards ceremony was held at the Los Angeles Music Center. Eric buttoned up his suit and got out of the limousine. There were enthusiastic cheers on both sides of the red carpet. Eric also faintly heard someone singing the song New Divide. Smiling and waving to the crowd, Eric walked to the red carpet alone without stopping. The reporters in the interview area were, of course, extremely disappointed. What made them even more disappointed was that Eric still did not bring any female companions today. There was less to talk about. After all, although Eric was still very young, his status and wealth were there. Since he broke up with Jennifer Aniston, who could possibly live in Eric's Freedom City, in Malibu Corner became the target of many gossip media. If someone could find out such information, they would definitely be able to buy it at a good price. When he was about to walk to the end of the red carpet, Eric was stopped by the NBC television host in charge of this year's Oscar broadcast. She politely invited Eric to the interview area. "Mr. Williams, hello. This is the second time you're on the red carpet. Do you feel anything different?" The female host in a black suit asked with a microphone. Eric smiled and said, "Of course, the fans have become more enthusiastic. I would like to thank everyone for their support during this time." The female host understood what Eric was referring to and did not continue. After all, NBC was not innocent in the recent storm. "Then, Mr. Williams, tell me about your expectations for tonight's awards. Not only did you receive 2 nominations for Best Original Screenplay and Best Adapted Screenplay, but you also unexpectedly received a nomination for Best Soundtrack. That's really surprising." When Eric heard this question, he leaned close to the microphone and repeated what everyone would say, such as whether the judges liked it or not. Then, Eric patiently answered a few more questions before the host reluctantly let him go. Just as he walked to the waiting area, Eric felt countless eyes on him. Eric smiled at the crowd without any focus in his eyes, then walked to the several film crews related to Firefly. The men in the crew were easy to talk to. Jonathan Demme, Al Pacino, Tom Hanks, and the others all came up to greet him warmly, but the women were a little reserved. After all, this place could still be photographed by the media. Eric greeted the men before looking at the women. Virginia stood quietly at the edge of the crowd with a faint smile on her face, looking aloof from worldly affairs. Nicole looked eager, but she guessed that this was something, so she stood there without moving. She only looked at Eric with undisguised emotions in her eyes. As for Julia, she was intimately holding on to Elizabeth. The 2 women looked at Eric with inexplicable complex emotions. After thinking about it, Eric walked over to Julia and Elizabeth. "Julie Liz although it's a little late now, I still have to say sorry." Hearing Eric's words, Julia tightened her grip on Elizabeth's arm, and even shrank back a little. Elizabeth was like a protective mother hen. She stepped forward and whispered, "Mr. Williams, you don't have to apologize. I just hope you can stay away from us in the future. Julia and I will be very grateful." Of course, no problem." Eric couldn't help but raise his hand and touch his nose with his index finger. Looking at the 2 women, he felt a little strange, but he didn't know what was strange about it. However, he was sure that his feeling was absolutely right. "By the way, Liz, why are you here?" Eric asked again. Of course I have my ways," Elizabeth said and pulled Julia, who had been silent all this time, away. The others thought that Eric was defeated in front of the 2 women, so they all showed a mocking look. Eric shrugged nonchalantly, greeted Nicole, and walked to Virginia. "Vicky, sorry, I couldn't attend the premiere of Drowning Dog at the beginning of the month." Eric walked to the girl's side and said apologetically and intimately, as Quentin's virgin work, because of Eric's support, this version of Drowning Dog was not like the previous life where it was lukewarm in North America, because there was not much publicity. This version of Drowning Dog not only won a special jury award at the Sundance Film Festival in January because of its unique narrative, but it also had 500 screens in North America, and a small premiere was held. Because her brother played a role in it, Virginia went to support it, and also invited Eric. However, although the storm was coming to an end, Eric still couldn't spare any energy to attend the premiere of Drowning Dog. After the promotion of Firefly, the box office of Drowning Dog reached more than $6 million in the first week. Quentin Tarantino also jumped into the ranks of the A-list directors, because the single theater box office of the film exceeded $10,000. He was currently thinking about his next script. Of course, the investor was still Firefly, but Eric didn't know if Quentin could write another pulp novel. After all, because of Eric's butterfly effect. Although Drowning Dog was not swept away by the butterfly wings, the fate of pulp novel was much more uncertain. Eric also made up his mind to talk to Quentin when he was free. If Quentin didn't want to do it, he would come up with the script himself. It's okay. I regretted it later. You must have a lot of things to do. How could you take the time to attend the premiere? By the way, Eric, my brother asked me to thank you on his behalf, Virginia said softly. Eric smiled and thought that Michael Madsen definitely wouldn't say such a thing. It was most likely the girl's own idea. During this period of time, he had also paid attention to the situation of Drowning Dog. After the release of Drowning Dog, Michael Madsen had been interviewed on a talk show with the crew for the sake of promoting the movie. He had expressed that he did not want to work with Quentin anymore. Furthermore, in front of the other main creators, he had called Quentin Tarantino a bastard on the spot. During the shooting of the scene where he killed the kidnapped police officer, because of some lines, Michael Madsen thought of his newborn child and almost broke down. However, Quentin also said that he liked being called a bastard very much. As for whether it was a joke or not, no one knew. Because there were too many people, Eric couldn't do anything intimate. After chatting casually with Virginia for a while, the group began to enter the Los Angeles Music Hall. What a coincidence. We sat together last time, Eric said to Virginia after entering the hall and finding a seat. Chapter 295. Can I sit next to you next time? Since there were no reporters around, Virginia relaxed a little and glanced at Eric. Eric smiled and took the girl's hand. He squeezed it and said, "Of course, as long as you're willing." Virginia looked around. The award ceremony would start in a few minutes. She was familiar with the people around her, so she didn't break away and let Eric hold her hand. At 16:30 in the western United States, the 62nd Academy Awards ceremony officially began. Learning from the previous ceremony, this time, the ceremony had a host again, Billy Crystal. In Eric's memory, Billy Crystal had hosted 9 consecutive Academy Awards ceremonies. Many people wondered why such a guy who wasn't famous in Hollywood always appeared on the stage of the Academy Awards ceremony. In fact, the host of the Academy Awards didn't have to be a Hollywood actor. Most of the time, it was a TV talk show host. Of course, Billy Crystal and another famous Oscar host, Whoopi Goldberg, could be said to be the most famous Oscar hosts in Hollywood. In addition to his identity as an actor, Billy Crystal was also a famous talk show host on Saturday Night Live and other talk shows. At the beginning of the show, as usual, it was a song and dance of the Oscar-nominated films. Crystal sang the songs of this year's nominees, such as My Left Foot, Steel Magnolias, Island Horror, and Driving for Miss Daisy, one by one. Because the lyrics were very interesting, and he also made some jokes about the guests, it was very enjoyable to listen to. After the Best Supporting Actor award, there was a series of minor awards. 20 minutes later, the famous actor Steve Martin, who was known as the Pulsatilla in Hollywood, stepped on the stage and made Eric a little more excited. Because the next award was Best Original Score. Eric's copy of Silent Love and Dark War was nominated. An excellent soundtrack can make a movie even better. Let's take a look at which movies have been nominated this year, Steve Martin said as he gestured to the big screen. Clips of the soundtracks of the nominated movies appeared on the screen one after another. The nominees for Best Original Score are Kissing the Girl from The Little Mermaid, I Saw Your Smile from Warm Family, I Was That Kind of Girl from Second Spring, and Silent Love from Dark War. After introducing the nominees, Steve Martin opened the envelope in his hand and glanced inside. Then he looked up in surprise and looked around the stage. His eyes locked onto Eric's face for half a second before he quickly looked away and read, "The winner of this year's Best Original Score Oscar is Silent Love, Dark Battle." Wow. Before Wu Yan's music could start, the hall was filled with gasps of surprise. Then countless gazes turned towards Eric. Eric also stood up in disbelief. He quickly hugged everyone around him and walked towards the stage with a smile. After receiving the Oscar from the guest, Eric came to the microphone and quickly organized his words. He looked around the audience and said with a smile, "This is really surprising. I didn't expect that the first Oscar I've won would be Best Original Score. However, the Oscar is a little more important than I thought. There was a burst of laughter in the audience. When the laughter stopped, Eric continued. More than a year ago, I was just an unknown young man who had just come of age. Because of my father's sudden death, I had to drop out of school and work in an Italian restaurant. Then one day, I suddenly felt that I couldn't be like this anymore. I had to do something. I had to do something. This idea was very strong. So I began to write my first novel and first screenplay. Fortunately, with the help of some people, I succeeded and have come all the way to where I am today. I've loved music since I was a child. After I got paid for the movie Back to 17, I bought my first piano. In my spare time, I would occasionally ponder over some tunes, and then somewhat clumsily write them down with the staff. Speechless Love was the product of this inspiration. I'm not a professional composer, so it was very unexpected for me to win this award. Here, I want to thank those who have helped me along the way. Mr. Michael Klaus, he helped me publish my first book. James Brooks and Penny Marshall, they gave me the opportunity to enter Hollywood. Jeffrey Hansen, he helped me complete my first movie and silently supported me in the following year. Finally, there are the beautiful girls in my movie. Oh. Okay, don't laugh, I'm serious. Thank you all. Although he didn't prepare a draft, Eric finished his acceptance speech quickly, and then followed the two presenters backstage. When Eric returned to his seat again, the award for Best Makeup, which was right after Best Soundtrack, had been presented. The presenters were introducing the nominees for Best Foreign Language Film this year. When the two people who were not very familiar with Eric read out the Best Foreign Language Film Award winner Rodin's Lover, Eric looked at the somewhat neurotic woman on the big screen, and his expression changed slightly. What's wrong? Are you inspired again? Virginia's tone was a little teasing. Eric shook his head and said, Nothing, I just suddenly thought of a few people. Why don't you just say that you thought of a few women? Virginia softly teased again. Eric smiled. He did think of a few women. The one on the big screen was Isabella Connie and the other two women, Sophie Marceau and Monica Bellucci. Eric originally had a feeling that although Isabella Connie had the best acting skills, followed by Sophie Marceau and Monica Bellucci, they had a lot in common in terms of appearance. In his previous life, Eric had seen people say that Isabella Connie looked like a combination of Sophie Marceau and Monica Bellucci. Chapter 296. Eric was thinking about the similarities and differences between the three European actresses as he looked around for Isabella Connie. If she hadn't been affected by Eric's butterfly effect, according to the Time, the actress who had won the César Award, the highest honor in French cinema, should have met Daniel Day-Lewis last year and fallen in love with him. But now it was hard to say. After looking around, Eric still couldn't find Isabella Connie. Then Virginia, who was sitting beside him, poked him in the waist. Eric, Best Supporting Actress. Eric hurriedly turned his attention to the stage. At that moment, the guest presenter for Best Supporting Actress, Kevin Kline, had already finished his speech. He began to introduce the names of the actors who had been nominated for Best Supporting Actress. The nominees for Best Supporting Actress this year are Brenda Frick for My Left Foot, Angelica Houston for Enemy, A Story of Love, Lena Olin for Enemy, A Story of Love, Julia Roberts for Steel Magnolias, and Diana West for Warm Family. Following Kevin Kline's introduction, the 5 nominees for Best Supporting Actress appeared on the big screen behind him one by one. Although Eric was a little surprised that Enemy, a love story, had won 2 Best Supporting Actress nominations, Eric paid more attention to Brenda Frick, who had won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for My Left Foot. That was because My Left Foot was the first very successful film directed by Mira Mike. Not only did it win 5 Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay, but Eric clearly remembered that Daniel Day-Lewis had won his first Best Actor Oscar for this film. As for the other awards, Eric wasn't too sure. Therefore, the Best Supporting Actress nomination for My Left Foot was undoubtedly the biggest threat to Julia. When this year's Oscar nominations were announced, Eric was still in the midst of the storm, and could not divert his attention to the public relations of the awards. As for Disney, it was even more impossible for them to do public relations for the film at that time. Therefore, they could only wait and see if Robert Shaye, who had 10 more years of film distribution experience than the Wayne and Stam brothers of Mira and Mike, could beat the Wayne and Stam brothers in terms of public relations. Eric looked at Julia's image on the big screen. The girl was nervously staring at the stage, but her body was slightly tilted. Eric curiously found Julia's position and looked over. It turned out that the girl and Elizabeth were leaning against each other. Eric could even see the two girls holding each other's arms through the gap between the seats. The strange feeling he had when they met at the end of the red carpet surfaced in his heart again. But before Eric could think about it, Kevin Kline opened the envelope and read, "This year's Best Supporting Actress Oscar goes to Julia Roberts." The music and applause rang out at the same time. Julia, who was in the front row, covered her mouth in surprise and leaned back in her chair. After a while, she stood up with the encouragement of the people around her. She hugged the crew of Steel Magnolias, one by one, and walked to the stage. Although the girl did not turn her head to look at him during the whole process, Eric was not angry at all. Instead, he was relieved. At least this result proved that Robert Shaye's public relations ability was not much worse than the Wayne and Stam brothers in terms of public relations. On the stage, Julia carefully held the Golden Man and gave her acceptance speech. She then walked off the stage with the guest presenter. What followed was another period of insignificant technical awards. A few minutes later, Julia walked out from the backstage exit on the left side of the stage. When she came to the set, she finally glanced at Eric with a hint of gratitude in her eyes. Before Eric could respond, he saw an arm pull the girl over. Then Elizabeth turned her head and glared at Eric. "Eric, did you do something outrageous again? Why do Julia and Elizabeth seem to have a problem with you?" Virginia asked softly when she noticed the reaction of the two girls. Eric glared at Virginia unhappily. "Why do you say again? Do I often do outrageous things?" Virginia rolled her eyes. "What do you think?" Eric clenched his hands together and made a few cracking sounds. "It seems that you have a problem with me. Come to my place tonight. Let's talk about what you mean by outrageous things." Virginia blushed when she heard Eric's words, but she did not refute. Although she lived very close to Eric's Pointy Corner manor, she had not been there even once. When Eric had just moved, the girl had either gone to her parents' place to celebrate the holiday, or she had been running around to promote Scary Island. When he was free and returned to Los Angeles, Eric encountered that storm again. Come to think of it, the two of them had not been intimate for a few months. As a mature woman, it would be a lie to say that Virginia did not want to do it. However, because Eric had said it first, and the girl's career in Hollywood had just taken off with terror on a small island, Virginia did not want to leave Eric. In any case, although the little man beside her was annoying sometimes, he was very considerate most of the time. After a series of technical awards such as Best Cinematography and Best Sound Effects, the award ceremony slowly reached the second half of the climax. After Tom Hanks and Melanie Griffith presented the Best Cinematography award together, the famous Roman holiday actor, Gregory Peck, stepped on the stage. Although Sigourney Weaver had been nominated for Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress at last year's Golden Globe Awards, Eric was sure that it was very difficult for such a thing to happen at an awards ceremony like the Oscars. Besides, Julia was only 23 years old. In this era where the Oscars were relatively conservative, it was already very lucky for her to win Best Supporting Actress and be nominated for Best Actress at the same time. As for winning 2 awards at the same time, it was even less likely for her to win 2 awards at the same time than an Alien Invasion. While Eric was thinking, Gregory Peck on the stage had finished introducing the 5 nominees for Best Actress. In many previous reports, many media outlets predicted that the winner of this year's Best Actress Oscar was likely to be Jessica Tandy, who had an outstanding performance in Driving for Miss Daisy. This 81-year-old actress with a turtleneck was once called the First Lady of Broadway. From this title, one could see some clues about her brilliant acting career. Moreover, even without Jessica Tandy and Julia's recent Best Supporting Actress award, Eric was sure that Julia would not win this award. This was because there was another contender for the Best Actress nomination, and that was Isabella Connie. In the movie Rodin's Lover, Isabella Connie's performance was crazy. Although Hollywood had always discriminated against foreign actors, if there was no competition from a veteran actress like Jessica Tandy with a brilliant resume, the Academy would undoubtedly award this award to Isabella Connie. On the stage, Gregory Peck slowly opened the envelope. In the nervous anticipation of the audience, he read out the name that was no longer suspenseful after he and not the previous Best Actor, Dustin Hoffman, stepped on the stage. The winner of this year's Best Actress Oscar is Jessica Tandy. Applause rang out again. A white-haired old woman slowly stood up and stepped onto the stage amidst the congratulations of the crew of Driving for Miss Daisy. Eric also looked at the crew of Driving for Miss Daisy, like everyone else. His eyes were locked on the male lead of Driving for Miss Daisy, Morgan Freeman. This veteran Hollywood actor had started acting at the age of 8, but his path to stardom had been extremely bumpy. It wasn't until 1987, at the age of 50, that Morgan Freeman emerged in Hollywood. It could be said that he was Hollywood's most legendary, inspirational man. After Jessica Tandy's speech, she walked off the stage with the help of the guests. The host, Billy Crystal, followed closely onto the stage and silently watched as Jessica Tandy and company completely disappeared. Only then did Billy Crystal turn to the microphone and clear his throat. He didn't make any more jokes and instead said with a rare seriousness, "Without a doubt, Driving for Miss Daisy is a very outstanding movie. At the same time, it has also made 2 very outstanding actors. In addition to Ms. Jessica Tandy, who has just left, there's also Mr. Morgan Freeman, who is sitting in the audience. Mr. Morgan Freeman is already 53 years old this year. If we include Ms. Jessica Tandy's age, then the average age of this pair of male and female leads is 67 years old. It must be the oldest average age in the history of the Oscars to have both male and female leads." After Billy Crystal finished speaking, the audience immediately applauded respectfully. Although Morgan Freeman still sat upright in the camera, the excitement on his face could not be concealed. After all, from the beginning of his acting career to the end, it had been decades. It was indeed an extremely long time. Chapter 297. After patiently waiting for the applause to stop, Billy Christopher said, "That's why Hollywood is a place full of dreams. Whether you're under 20 or over 80 years old, as long as you're really talented and willing to work hard, you'll definitely be recognized." There was another round of applause, and many people turned their eyes to Eric. There was no doubt that Billy Crystal was referring to Eric when he said that he was under 20 years old. The camera lens also turned to Eric. Eric clapped his hands without batting an eyelid. A faint smile appeared on his face as a response. After Billy Crystal finished his speech, he invited another group of guests, and then left the stage. After a few more insignificant awards, another legendary Hollywood actress, Jane Fonda, appeared on the stage. Eric couldn't help but sit up straight, because the next 2 awards were the 2 most important awards for him in this year's Oscars. Although Eric had directed 4 movies this year, and Firefly had also applied for the Best Director award for Pretty Woman and Dark War, he didn't get a nomination for either of them. Therefore, the 2 Best Screenplay awards that Eric had won through Island Horror and Smelling a Woman were the 2 most important nominations for this year's Oscars. Jane Fonda, who was born in an acting family, was about the same age as Morgan Freeman. However, she looked like she was in her 40s. The black slim-fit dress made the actress vaguely show some of her youthful charm. This year is undoubtedly a bumper harvest for Hollywood. Not only did the total domestic box office exceed $5 billion for the first time, but there are also more excellent movies than previous years. And no matter which movie is called excellent, it can't be separated from a good script. The script is the foundation of a movie. So let's take a look at the movies nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. As Jane Fonda spoke, she turned slightly to the big screen and continued to read. The nominees for Best Adapted Screenplay are Driving for Miss Daisy, Alfred Ahari; Enemy: A Story of Love, Roger Simon; Dreams Come True, Phil Alden Robinson; Smelling a Woman, Jim Sheridan; Smelling a Woman, Eric Williams. The 5 nominees appeared on the big screen one by one. Eric stared at the stage without blinking. Although he wanted to show a nonchalant look in this tense situation, Eric's hands on his knees still couldn't help but clench into fists. Although the Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Original Screenplay awards still didn't attract much attention compared to the last 4 awards, compared to the insignificant Best Soundtrack Technical Award, these 2 awards were much more valuable. After Jane Fonda introduced the nominees, she didn't let the audience wait too long. She quickly opened the envelope in her hand, glanced at it, and then leaned close to Mike and said, "The nominee for Best Adapted Screenplay is Driving for Miss Daisy." In the thunderous applause, Eric's heart skipped a beat. He had a strong feeling that something was wrong. Among the nominees for Best Screenplay, Smelling a Woman was the one most likely to win the award. After all, everyone knew that horror movies were not favored by the Oscars. Although he had thought of applying for Sleepless in Seattle or Pretty Woman for Best Original Screenplay, after all, romance movies were more popular than horror movies. However, after thinking about it again and again, Eric decided to apply for the Best Original Screenplay for Scary Island, and gave up on Sleepless in Seattle and Pretty Woman. After all, the possibility of a romance movie winning the Best Original Screenplay was very low. Although Scary Island was a horror movie, this script was undoubtedly much more exciting than traditional horror movies. The possibility of winning an award was also higher than the other 2 romance movies. Although the Oscars wouldn't prohibit Eric from applying for the other 2 romance movies together, and the possibility of being nominated wasn't small, that would only spread the votes and make the possibility of several scripts winning very low. But Eric now found that he still ignored another fact. Whether it was the Best Original Screenplay or the Best Adapted Screenplay, the voting was done by the members of the Writers Guild. Therefore, after he was nominated for the Best Original Screenplay for Smelling a Woman and Scary Island at the same time, the writers who had voting rights would consider that he had received 2 nominations, and it would be inappropriate for him to lose all his nominations. They would at least vote for one of the 2 movies. But Eric was also sure that most of the writers wouldn't vote for both scripts at the same time. They would only choose one of the 2 scripts, Smelling a Woman and Scary Island. This also meant that although the Best Original Screenplay and the Best Adapted Screenplay were 2 different awards, the votes for these 2 awards were still divided. Then, there was no doubt that if the members of the Writers Guild were to choose one of the 2, Smelling a Woman, which had a higher artistic achievement, would definitely get more votes than Scary Island. Then, since even Smelling a Woman couldn't win an award, then Scary Island was even more hopeless. Eric sighed in his heart and shook his head slightly. He quickly restrained his expression and looked at the stage. After the Best Adapted Screenplay, Jane Fonda didn't walk off the stage. Instead, she continued to introduce the list of nominees for the Best Original Screenplay. The nominees for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay are Death Poets Society, Tom Schulman, Crime and Wrong, Woody Allen, Sex, Lies and Videotape, Steven Soderbergh, Scary Island, Eric Williams, When Harry Met Sally, Nora Ephron. Eric's face appeared on the screen in the middle of the stage again. Even though many people could see him when they looked up, many people still looked at where Eric was sitting. There was no doubt that these people were aware of Eric's current predicament. As for whether or not they were gloating over his misfortune, that was something that no one knew. Eric turned a blind eye to other unimportant gazes. He only nodded at the people around him who were looking at him with concern, and gave them a reassuring look. Chapter 298. Although he no longer had any expectations for this award, Eric's expression was still a little uneasy. However, at the same time he comforted himself like a cue in his heart. Anyway, he was still young. It was not a good thing to win an award too early. On the stage, after Jane Fonda introduced the nominees for Best Original Screenplay, she looked around the audience. Intentionally or unintentionally, Eric found that the woman's eyes lingered on him for a moment. But before Eric could make any confirmation, Jane Fonda lowered her head and opened the envelope. She took out the card with the winner's name written on it and looked at it. A surprised expression flashed across her face. Then, She smiled and looked up at Eric again. Eric was sure that this time it was definitely not his imagination. If the look just now could have been inadvertent, then this time did it mean? His heart beat rapidly a few times. Eric unconsciously clenched his fists again and stared at Jane Fonda with bright eyes. Jane Fonda seemed to feel the urging of everyone below the stage. She did not keep them in suspense anymore. She leaned close to Mike and said loudly, "The winner of the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay is Island Horror." The most impossible thing happened. Most of the people in the Los Angeles Music Hall were people who had been immersed in Hollywood for a long time. When they heard the name, many of them also showed a surprised expression. Although he had been hinted in advance, Eric still stared in disbelief. It was not until people around him stood up that Eric stood up. Thunderous applause soon followed. At the same time, a scene that surprised everyone in the awards hall also happened. As Eric stood up, more people followed, including Island Horror, Sleepless in Seattle, Dark War, Pretty Woman, and other Firefly-related crews that had a series of nominations. The number of people who stood up involved the people in the 5 rows around Eric. Although many people who stood up immediately realized that it was inappropriate, it was even more inappropriate to sit down, so they could only stay where they were. Eric hugged a few people nearby. Due to the pressure of time, he could only shake hands with the people around him. Some of them were too far away and could only touch fingers. Even so, it took nearly a minute for Eric to walk onto the stage. Below the stage, many people's serious doubts, shock, and helplessness had turned into envy. If a small Best Original Screenplay award could cause such a stir, after today, no one would dare to underestimate Eric's status in Hollywood. Eric had prepared the acceptance speech for this award beforehand, so it was easier than when he had won the Best Original Score award an hour ago. While Eric was giving his acceptance speech, he was also thinking about why he had won the award. Without a doubt, this was the result of Oscar dividing the pork. Eric felt that he had underestimated the Oscars. With his current influence in Hollywood, if he had won nothing after being nominated for 2 awards, then the fairness of the Oscars would be questioned again. Moreover, this time the doubts would definitely not only come from the media, but also from the general public. As for the reason, it was because of the incident some time ago. Eric had already experienced a wave of malicious suppression. If the Oscars still let him go home empty-handed after he had been nominated for 2 awards, then the public would inevitably have some negative associations and be disappointed in the Oscars. As for why he didn't win the Best Adapted Screenplay award for Smelling Women, which was more likely to win, but the Best Original Screenplay award for Scary Island, Eric understood that it was likely the result of a series of games behind the scenes. Although he was very interested in the series of inside stories, Eric knew that he had not yet reached the level where he could touch on the internal games of the Oscars. With this in mind, he followed Jane Fonda and the presenter backstage. The staff attentively came up to take the little golden man that did not have a nameplate in Eric's hand, and pin the golden nameplate on for him. Next was the award for Best Director, and Smelling Women was also nominated for Best Director. Therefore Eric, who was waiting for the staff to pin the nameplate, was inevitably a little anxious. At this time Jane Fonda, who was presenting the award for him, came over. "Mr. Williams, congratulations." Jane Fonda smiled and reached out to Eric. "Ms. Fonda, thank you for the tip just now." Although he was anxious, Eric still maintained his good interests and flattered her. "I've seen many of your movies. Return with Honor and Murder in Red Street are both very good, but my favorite is still Golden Pond. The kinship shown in this movie is very touching. Thank you for liking it." Jane Fonda maintained her smile and continued, "Mr. Williams, you are definitely going to have a celebration party next, right?" Eric's expression changed slightly, and he quickly realized that this woman did not simply come over to say hello to him. Although he did not know the other party's purpose, it was definitely beneficial for him to establish some friendship with a famous Hollywood acting family. Therefore, Eric said without hesitation, "Yes, Ms. Fonda. If you are free, you are welcome to our celebration party after the ceremony. The venue is on the 3rd floor of the Beverly Hills Hotel." "I will be there." Jane Fonda nodded. She knew that Eric was also in a hurry to return to the hall, so she did not say too much and quickly left. Even so, when Eric returned to the awards hall, he was disappointed to find that the director of Born on the 4th of July, Oliver Stone, was giving his acceptance speech on stage. Al Pacino, who was nearby, saw Eric coming back and gave him a helpless look. As for Martin Brest, Eric did not see his expression, but other than disappointment, Eric could not think of anything else. Speaking of the movie Born on the 4th of July, it had to be mentioned about the sad Tom Cruise. After watching this movie, Eric remembered that Tom Cruise would have been nominated for his first Best Actor Oscar with this movie. Unfortunately, because of his role in Dark War, Cruise missed out on this movie. Originally, Firefly and Cruise had tried to get a nomination for Best Actor, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Although Tom Cruise was nominated for Best Actor in a drama series at the Golden Globe Awards for his role in Dark War, he did not get an Oscar nomination. Therefore, when Eric saw Cruise a few days ago, the other party did not give him a good look. Cruise had already received enough remuneration for his role in Dark Warfare. Therefore, even though Eric felt a little helpless about Cruise not being nominated for an Oscar, he didn't feel like he owed him anything. After all, Cruise's remuneration was much higher than Hank's. With that thought in mind, the previous Best Actress winner, Jodie Foster, began to introduce the nominees for Best Actor. Listening to the introduction of the girl on the stage, Eric suddenly thought that if The Silence of the Lambs had been produced and released last year, Jodie Foster would have likely won the Academy Award for Best Actress. This was a pity. The nominees for Best Actor are Morgan Freeman, Driving for Miss Daisy; Al Pacino, Smell a Woman; Daniel Day-Lewis, My Left Foot; Kenneth Branagh, Henry V, God of War; and Robin Williams, Dead Poets Society. Every time a person was introduced, a wonderful film clip would appear on the big screen behind Jodie Foster. Eric looked at Al Pacino, whose waist was slightly tense not far away. He could understand Al Pacino's feelings. Since 17 years ago, Al Pacino had been nominated for 5 Oscars, but all of them failed. With Al Pacino's acting skills, it was not an exaggeration to say that the Oscars owed him an Oscar. As for the original Best Actor Oscar winner, Daniel Day-Lewis, although his acting skills were also very good, Daniel Day-Lewis's disadvantage was also very obvious. First of all, he was British, which would definitely be discriminated against by the Oscars. Secondly, Daniel Day-Lewis was only in his early 30s, which had just reached the average age of an Oscar. Compared to Al Pacino, who was already in his 50s, he looked even younger. In the end, it was impossible for Daniel Day-Lewis to compete with Al Pacino, who had been in Hollywood for almost 20 years, in terms of qualifications and connections. In his previous life, the reason why Daniel Day-Lewis was able to win the award had a lot to do with the fact that it happened to be the Oscar year. Although he was affected by the butterfly effect, Eric could still associate some clues from the current list. Most of the nominated movies should be the same as in his previous life. However, among these nominated movies, except for Born on the 4th of July, which originally had some fame because of Tom Cruise, the other movies didn't have much influence. This time, things were not out of Eric's expectations. After Jodie Foster opened the envelope, she quickly read out Al Pacino's name. In the warm applause, Al Pacino greeted the crew of Knowing a Woman by scent. He did not immediately go on stage. Instead, he walked towards Eric in the back row. Eric realized what he was going to do and stood up with a smile. Jonathan Demme, who was sitting on the other side of Eric, sensibly moved aside. Chapter 299. Al Pacino gave Eric a big hug and said, "Eric, thank you." Eric took a deep breath as he was hugged by Al Pacino. He smiled and said, "Al, you deserve it. Even without me, I believe that with your ability, you would have won the Oscar for Best Actor sooner or later." Patting Eric on the back, Al Pacino didn't say anything else. He looked at Eric gratefully and walked to the stage. Eric returned to his seat and saw Al Pacino walk to the stage. When he walked up the stairs, he staggered and almost fell, but no one in the hall laughed. Instead, the applause became louder. Taking the Golden Man from Jodie Foster, Al Pacino walked to the microphone. Although there was still a glimmer in his eyes, his gaze became sharp again. Looking at the audience below the stage, Al Pacino said generously after a moment, "I have been waiting for this day for 17 years. Although he was very excited, Al Pacino didn't say too much. A minute later, Al Pacino followed Jodie Foster backstage. Then Michelle Pfeiffer, who was nominated for the Best Actress Oscar, walked to the stage. After a speech, the nominated song Flying Over the Rainbow was performed live. A few minutes later, Al Pacino returned to the audience. The last and most important award of this year's Oscars was coming. Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson walked to the stage together. After a short gag, they began to introduce the list of films nominated for Best Picture. As the award ceremony had lasted for several hours, the films nominated for Best Picture had already been introduced in detail, so the introductions were very brief this time. The 5 winning films appeared on the big screen one after another. Warren Beatty opened the envelope and quickly read out the name of Driving for Miss Daisy. After failing to be nominated for Best Director, Eric no longer had much hope of being nominated for Best Picture. Now that he heard the name, Driving for Miss Daisy, he felt more balanced than anyone else. After all, this movie had won Best Picture in his previous life. Now that it had won Best Picture again, Eric wasn't too disappointed. This result was actually not bad. Although because of Eric's appearance, there were many movies that did not originally appear at the Oscars this year. If one were to think about it carefully, this year was still a small Oscar year. Knowing a Woman by Smelling Fragrance was undoubtedly excellent, but this excellence was mainly reflected in Al Pacino's acting skills. As far as the movie was concerned, it was far from the sensational effect of movies such as Schindler's List, Forrest Gump, and Titanic in the history of the Oscars. Therefore, this year's Oscars did not have a single movie that could win all the major awards. The Academy also divided the 4 major awards among several different movies. Firefly was already very lucky to be able to get a nomination for Best Actor. With the final award, the 62nd Academy Awards officially came to an end. Some people were happy, while others were disappointed. As he walked out, Eric saw the most disappointed people this year. The Weinstein brothers of Miramax and the crew of My Left Foot. Although My Left Foot had received 5 nominations, it did not win a single award. Moreover, it seemed that it had been sniped by Firefly. For example, Daniel Day-Lewis, who was supposed to win Best Actor, was taken away by Al Pacino. Julia also won Best Supporting Actress. As for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, and Best Picture, although it had nothing to do with Firefly, My Left Foot also did not win any awards. Eric and the Weinstein brothers had met once when they tried to buy Miramax. Their offer did not satisfy Eric. In the end, the deal did not succeed, so Eric mainly focused on the new line. At this time, seeing Eric again after more than half a year, the Harvey Weinstein and Bob Stan brothers only hesitated for a moment before they walked up to Eric, who was in the crowd surrounded by Firefly. Eric smiled and shook hands with them. At the same time, he also noticed Daniel Day-Lewis' unconvinced gaze when he looked at the little golden man in Al Pacino's hand. He just smiled. "Mr. Williams, congratulations." Harvey Weinstein did not look disappointed at all. He discreetly pushed away Jonathan Demme, who was originally next to Eric, with a flattering smile on his face. "Mr. Williams, it's a pity that we didn't succeed in our cooperation back then. I think maybe we can find some time to talk again?" Eric raised his eyebrows slightly. Now that Firefly and the new line had been integrated, although Firefly would not be underestimated, its overall strength was still not comparable to the 7 major film companies. Therefore, if he were to buy the Weinstein brothers Miramax, he did not know where to place the Weinstein brothers. Moreover, Robert Shea's operation of the Oscars this time also proved that Firefly's public relations ability for the Oscars was not much worse than the Weinstein brothers. In fact, it was even better than the other party. In addition, with Eric around in terms of the selection of films for the Oscars, his vision was not much worse than the Weinstein brothers. Therefore, Eric was no longer as eager to buy Miramax as he had thought. However, the ability of the 2 brothers in front of him was there after all. Although he was no longer eager to buy Miramax, Eric did not intend to push the other party to other film companies. In that case, let's make an appointment to talk about it. Eric nodded to Harvey Weinstein. Just as he was about to say something, Eric saw a group of people from another crew passing by. Although he did not know the others, Eric was very familiar with one of the women. She was Isabella Connie. The woman seemed to have noticed Eric's gaze. She looked at Eric for a moment, and then looked away without any intention of greeting him. Eric didn't mind. Instead, he turned his head and looked around. Among the crew of My Left Foot, who was following behind the Harvey Weinstein brothers, Daniel Day-Lewis was completely indifferent when Isabella Johnny passed by. Clearly, the two of them weren't familiar with each other, let alone passionately in love. Eric stretched his fingers and thought so. It's really interesting. Chapter 300. The spacious party hall was crowded with people. This was the Oscar celebration party that Firefly was holding. Under normal circumstances, except for those award-winning film crews, usually only the 7 major Hollywood film companies would hold similar parties after the Golden Globe Awards or the Oscars, and invite a group of Hollywood stars to participate. Second- and third-tier film companies would not do this at all. This was not a matter of money, but a reflection of a company's strength. This was because when second- and third-tier film companies held similar parties, they would encounter the awkward situation of not having any heavyweight stars to support them. That would be even more embarrassing. But Firefly was different. Although Firefly was still in the position of a second-tier film company, Firefly had a great impact on the awards and box office this year. In addition to most of the original UTA stars, there were also many other Hollywood stars who came to support or look for opportunities. I feel that the Academy is still too conservative. This year, the 4 movies that you personally directed have all been successful in the box office. Other than Home Alone 2, which is a pure comedy, I feel that the other 3 movies won't have a problem getting a nomination for Best Director, especially Dark War. It's such a pity. Harvey Weinstein's chubby face moved closer to Eric's side and said sincerely. Eric happened to meet the Weinstein brothers after the Oscar ceremony. He originally wanted to find a chance to chat, but when the Weinstein brothers heard that Firefly was holding a celebration party, they directly brought the entire crew of My Left Foot over. Although My Left Foot received 5 nominations, they came back empty-handed in the end. The Weinstein brothers canceled the original celebration party, and the crew of My Left Foot did not complain. Eric smiled with a red wine in his hand. Harvey, this is nothing. I'm still so young, and there will be many opportunities in the future. It's not a good thing to win an award too early. It's easy to lose one's direction and become stagnant. No. Harvey Weinstein immediately shook his head and said, Eric, actually, I think there are many mistakes in Firefly's strategy to win awards. Just like the 2 best screenplay nominations you received. If I were in your shoes, I definitely wouldn't have applied for Best Original Screenplay and Best Adapted Screenplay separately. It's not that your screenplay is not good enough, but that the 2 screenplays are good enough. This will cause both nominations to fail. As for the reason, I think you can definitely guess it now. There's also Knowing Women by Smelling Fragrance. It's a pity that he only won the Best Actor award. I think Mr. Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in My Left Foot was also very good. If it wasn't for Scent Knows Women, perhaps the Best Actor award would have been his. Eric looked at Daniel Day-Lewis, who was not far away, and continued. I heard that when Daniel was acting, he was so immersed in his role that he couldn't extricate himself. He even really treated himself as a disabled person, and often needed help to eat. Harvey Weinstein looked around, then slightly lowered his voice and said, Actually, I originally wanted to PR for Best Actor. Although My Left Foot was good enough, it was a British film after all. The main character in the film was also an Irish artist. Therefore, although My Left Foot was nominated for 5 awards, it was most likely to only be Best Actor. However, after Scent Knows Women appeared, I knew that Daniel's Best Actress award was definitely out of the question. The possibility of Best Picture was even lower, so I changed it to Best Director. Unfortunately, I still couldn't win against Oliver Stone in the end. After all, Oliver is a famous director in Hollywood for many years, and it was Jim Sheridan's first time directing a film. In the end, it was Mira Mike's bad luck this time. Eric nodded noncommittally and continued to wait for Harvey to continue. He knew that Harvey definitely didn't lay out so much just to reveal a little inside information to him. Sure enough, after a short pause, Harvey Weinstein pointed at Robert Shea, who was excitedly discussing something with a few people nearby, and said, "Eric, I know that Mr. Robert Shea was the one who led Firefly's Oscar public relations, but you also saw that Scent Knows Women is such an excellent film. Moreover, compared to My Left Foot, Scent Knows Women embodies typical American values. The director, Martin Brest, is also very experienced. With all these advantages, in the end, he only won the Best Actor award. Both Best Director and Best Picture missed out. That's really a pity. If Scent Knows Women was directed by Mira Mike, I believe that at least one of the Best Director and Best Picture awards could have been won." After hearing Harvey Weinstein's words, Eric said with some regret, "Harvey, what you said does make a lot of sense. However, there's no place for Mira Mike in Firefly now. When I was planning to expand Firefly, I did some research on Mira Mike. I know that you two brothers buy films in Europe or the Far East all year round, and then bring them back for distribution in China. Then, you must have a lot of foundation and connections abroad. My original plan was to let Robert Shea be in charge of distribution in North America, and leave the expansion of overseas channels to you two brothers." When Harvey Weinstein heard Eric's words, he couldn't help but stick out his tongue and lick his wet lips. The expansion of Firefly's overseas channels was a very big cake. It must be known that the first few films that Eric personally directed had similar box office results overseas and domestic box office results. Even Pretty Woman's box office overseas was $100 million higher than the domestic box office. The reason why the Weinstein brothers mainly focused on selecting indie films to compete for the Oscars was that they were not capable enough. Gaining fame through winning awards and then earning box office and peripheral profits was also an unconventional method. After all, Hollywood only had one Oscars every year. If there was a chance to release a commercial film that sold well, the Weinstein brothers would definitely change their route without hesitation. Then, "Eric, I think now." Eric shook his head. "It's too late now, Harvey. Firefly and New Line have now been integrated. Although I'm still the biggest shareholder of Firefly, I have to consider Robert's feelings. Compared to the current Firefly, Mira Mike's power is too weak. If we go according to the original plan, Robert will definitely not be willing to let you two brothers share the power of overseas distribution." After a trace of disappointment flashed across Harvey Weinstein's face, he quickly said, "Eric, actually, I'm better at PR awards. Maybe we can." "Harvey, why do you think so many people are so enthusiastic about the Oscars?" Harvey Weinstein paused for a moment and said, "Benefits." Eric smiled and said, "You see, that's right. That's why, although any large film company values the Oscars very much, none of them put the Oscars in the first place. Most of the movies they produce are commercial films. The same goes for Firefly. Moreover, in the next few years, Firefly's main focus will be on commercial films. When it has developed to a certain level of strength and scale, it will step into the field of indie films and gain some glory for the company." "Eric, don't you think that these two things can go hand in hand?" Harvey said unwillingly. "Of course it can. So, there is still a high possibility of cooperation between us. But a merger is impossible. By the way, there's a film that I'm very optimistic about. The film's producer is also here today. Do you want me to introduce him to you?" Harvey Weinstein nodded disappointedly. Eric brought Harvey to find Elizabeth and Julia quickly. The two girls were sitting on a sofa in the corner and whispering to each other. "Hey, two beauties, can I sit down?" Eric asked. Hearing Eric's voice, Julia's body suddenly stiffened. Elizabeth raised her leg and kicked at Eric. "Go away, playboy." Eric quickly dodged to the side. Looking at the sharp black heels, he wiped the cold sweat in his heart. At the same time, he suddenly realized that the two women in front of him seemed to have kicked his leg. And it was the same leg. Birds of a feather flocked together. "Liz, don't be like this. I've already apologized. Here, let me introduce you to someone." Hearing Eric's words, Elizabeth stood up reluctantly. Julia also stood up. Her eyes swayed a few times before focusing on Eric's face and forcing a smile. Elizabeth looked at the fat man beside Eric. You mean him? Harvey Weinstein. I know him. Harvey looked at Eric in confusion. Now in Hollywood, there were probably not many women who dared to kick Eric without hesitation. Therefore, he had a strong curiosity about Elizabeth's identity. Eric quickly said, Harvey, this is Elizabeth Murdoch, Mr. Rupert Murdoch's second daughter. Miss Murdoch, hello. I didn't expect you to know me. It's such an honor. Harvey Weinstein immediately reached out his chubby hand with a smile. Elizabeth shook hands with Harvey reluctantly, then turned her gaze to Eric. What's the matter? It's like this. I think that after The Silence of the Lambs is produced, it will definitely do well at next year's Oscars. Harvey is very good at public relations in this area, so I wanted to introduce you to each other. Oh. Elizabeth let out a long sigh, and her expression became slightly angry. So, after Firefly finished the distribution and made money, they didn't care about the awards anymore? Eric waved his hand. Of course not, Liz. You must have misunderstood. I mean, Harvey is very good at public relations, so I want to hand over the public relations for next year's The Silence of the Lambs awards to them. Don't worry, all the public relations fees will be paid by Firefly. Elizabeth heard Eric say this and snorted coldly. She raised her chin and said, That's more like it. After the girl finished speaking, she turned her gaze to Harvey Weinstein with a questioning look. Harvey Weinstein was more than happy to have a relationship with the little princess of News Corporation. Although he only heard a few words, Harvey was keenly aware that Elizabeth was now working as a producer. This was a good opportunity. If he could establish a relationship with Miramax, with the financial resources of the Murdoch family, would Miramax still have to continue to make trouble? Thinking of this, the expression on Harvey's face became even more attentive. Every wrinkle on his chubby face was smiling as he said, I don't have any problems here either, Miss Murdoch. It's an honor to work with you. After the matter was settled, Elizabeth waved her hand at Eric and Harvey. Then if there's nothing else, you can leave. The two men suddenly looked at each other. Harvey thought in his heart that they hadn't exchanged contact information or anything. Eric recalled the scene in the palace drama in his previous life, where the concubines asked the young eunuchs to kneel down. Elizabeth was just about to pull Julia to sit down again when she suddenly thought of something. She said to Eric, You stay, I have something to ask you. Seeing this situation, Harvey could only tactfully leave for the time being. After Harvey left, Elizabeth asked, Mr. Williams, I heard that Ghost has been launched. The corner of Eric's mouth twitched. He nodded cooperatively and said, Yes, Miss Murdoch, do you have any orders? Before Elizabeth said anything, Julia was already amused by the tone of the two people and burst out laughing. The atmosphere was ruined. Elizabeth immediately pretended to be angry and pinched Julia's ribs. She didn't stop until Julia giggled and begged for mercy. Eric looked at the two women's playful appearance and laughed. Hey, I say, this is a public place. You should pay attention to your image. It's none of your business, you bastard. Okay, I don't care. Your Majesty, if you have something to say, please go ahead. Eric smiled bitterly and raised his hands in surrender. I can't help it, I won't lower myself to your level. I mean, the female lead in your next movie. What do you think of Julia? Eric looked at Julia and hesitated. He was about to speak when Elizabeth raised her eyebrows. You're not allowed to disagree. This role is decided. Liz, don't be like this, and I don't want to be with. Julia reacted and quickly pulled Elizabeth back. Elizabeth patted Julia's thigh comfortingly and said, Don't worry, I will be by your side during the filming. I won't give some despicable guy any more chances. Chapter 301. Eric spread his hands helplessly. But Julia is really not suitable. Upon hearing Eric's words, a look of disappointment flashed in Julia's eyes even though she wasn't too willing. Meanwhile, Elizabeth asked, Then tell me, what's inappropriate about it? Julia doesn't fit the image of the female lead at all. In my imagination, the female lead should have short hair. Elizabeth said unhappily. It's just hair. Just cut it. It's not like Julia didn't cut her hair when she was filming Steel Magnolias last year. You're completely twisting my logic. Okay. Actually, the image of the character in my imagination should be like this. Eric looked, then reached out to dip his finger into the red wine in the glass. He quickly drew on the coffee table in front of the three of them. Soon, the image of Molly that Demi Moore had created in his memory appeared on the glass table. The two girls watched curiously as Eric quickly drew. When Eric finished, Elizabeth stared at him for a while, then raised her head angrily. I get it. It's just that her mouth is a little small. You're complaining that Julia's mouth is too big now. When you did that, why didn't you complain that Julia's mouth was too big? You bastard. Eric said bitterly. Liz, can we be more serious? Julia also pulled Elizabeth at this time. Okay, Liz. Even if he wants me to act, I won't act. Elizabeth was about to say something when another woman's voice suddenly sounded beside the three of them. Mr. Williams, so you're here. Elizabeth and Julia first looked behind Eric, then opened their mouths at the same time, and let out a soft sound of surprise. Eric looked behind him, and his eyes widened. The person who spoke was Jane Fonda, who had given him an award on the Oscar stage not long ago. However, this was not the key to the matter. The key was the young woman holding Jane Fonda's arm. Jane Fonda saw that the three of them were looking at her niece in surprise. She quickly followed Julia's gaze and looked at the coffee table in front of the three of them. Then she also looked puzzled. Mr. Williams, I didn't expect your painting skills to be so good. It's just a few simple strokes, but they look so vivid. Eric smiled awkwardly, then stood up and looked at the girl beside Jane Fonda. He asked knowingly, Miss Fonda, this is… what a hypocrite. You've already drawn her, yet you're still asking who she is. Elizabeth pouted and sneered. She then pulled Julia and left. Although Jane Fonda knew Julia, she didn't know Elizabeth, so she didn't mind when the two girls left. Instead, she said to Eric, Mr. Williams, this is my niece Bridget Fonda. She's my brother's daughter. Nice to meet you, Miss Fonda. Eric reached out and shook Bridget Fonda's hand. Bridget Fonda also noticed the almost dried head on the coffee table at this time. She had just cut her hair short because of filming some time ago, so her current appearance was almost 80% similar to the woman on the coffee table. Although she didn't know why Eric drew this picture, Bridget Fonda still felt that perhaps her goal would be much smoother today. Eric knew that Jane Fonda had started to contact him backstage at the Oscars. She must have something to say. Interluding the picture on the coffee table, Eric pointed to the seats where Elizabeth and Julia were originally sitting and said, Both of you, please take a seat. The aunt and niece thanked him and walked to the sofa together. Eric looked at the two women in front of him. In his memory, it seemed that Jane Fonda should have fallen out with her brother, Peter Fonda. However, looking at the two women, perhaps the conflict of the previous generation didn't affect this generation. Speaking of which, although the Fonda family's power in Hollywood couldn't be compared to the Coppola family, it still couldn't be underestimated. This kind of power could be seen from Bridget Fonda, who was sitting next to Jane Fonda. This girl with mediocre acting skills had debuted in the late 1980s and acted in movies for more than 10 years. She had been neither popular nor had any achievements in awards or box office. Even until she had to retire from acting due to a car accident, Bridget Fonda had acted in dozens of movies, most of which were female leads, but she didn't have a single masterpiece. This kind of situation was simply unimaginable for other actresses with no background in Hollywood. If ordinary actresses had no background and no connections, they would have been abandoned by Hollywood producers if they didn't have any response after acting in a few movies. Mr. Williams, may I ask why you drew that head just now? After the two women sat down, Bridget Fonda couldn't help but speak first. Eric hesitated for a moment before giving her an ambiguous explanation. I was just explaining something to Miss Julia and drew it in passing. I didn't expect it to be so similar to Miss Fonda. Jane Fonda didn't give Eric a chance to play dumb. She asked with a smile, Mr. Williams, that should be the look of one of the female leads in your movie, right? Eric coughed dryly before saying, sort of. Don't tell me it's the movie Ghost that you're about to start filming? Jane Fonda asked again. Sooner or later, the movie would be produced for the audience. Eric couldn't change the character's image just to tell such a small lie, so he nodded again. The aunt and niece looked at each other. Jane Fonda then said, "It's like this, Mr. Williams. Since it's such a coincidence, I was wondering if you could give Bridget a chance to audition?" Eric was a little hesitant. Since Jane Fonda had spoken, she definitely wasn't referring to the first few rounds of auditions, but the final audition for the role. Although Demi Moore, who played Molly in the original Ghost, had always been criticized for her acting skills, in that movie, Demi Moore had a rare outburst of acting skills. As a result, she was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. Moreover, when Demi Moore took on the role of Ghost, she had acted in movies for many years and had some experience. However, the girl in front of him was a newcomer who had only debuted 2 years ago. Her later movies also proved that she didn't have much potential in acting. Bridget Fonda saw the hesitation in Eric's expression and looked at her aunt for help. Jane Fonda gave her niece a reassuring look and said, "Mr. Williams, although this request is indeed a little abrupt, you just need to give Bridget a chance to audition. Bridget's father and I will definitely remember your kindness." Hearing that, Eric quickly nodded. Although this favor would be greatly reduced if Bridget Fonda didn't get the role in the end, it was still a favor, and it might come in handy in the future. "All right then, Ms. Fonda. However, I can only give Ms. Fonda a chance to audition. As for the outcome, I can't give any guarantees." "Of course." Jane Fonda nodded and looked at her niece beside her. She stood up and said, "Mr. Williams, I'll take my leave first. Bridget likes your movies very much. Perhaps you can have a chat." Eric also stood up and watched Jane Fonda leave before sitting down again. He and Bridget Fonda looked at each other a few times. The two of them were like a blind couple meeting for the first time. They were so embarrassed that they didn't know what to say. In the end, it was Eric who spoke first. "Miss Fonda, actually, I've seen your movie." Which one is it?" Bridget Fonda asked. "Magnificent Aria," Eric said and pointed to the corner of his mouth. Bridget Fonda pursed her lips and said, "At that time, I had a pimple on the corner of my mouth, so I didn't look very good on camera." "I think it's still very good," Eric teased without leaving a trace. Most of the scenes in Magnificent Aria were nude scenes. Back then, Eric had also watched those scenes, so Bridget Fonda was no exception. Eric also couldn't understand why this girl would accept such a movie in the first place. Perhaps she was fearless. After all, with her family backing her, she didn't have to be careful about her image like other actresses. Upon hearing Eric's words, Bridget Fonda's face turned slightly red. As it was their first time meeting, the two of them didn't talk much. After chatting for a while, Eric said, "Miss Fonda, I've been sitting here for quite a while. With so many people here, I have to socialize." "Well, please help yourself, Mr. Williams. Also, you can call me Bridget." "No problem." Eric nodded with a smile and got up to walk elsewhere. After the Oscars, the newspapers made their usual comments about the Oscars. Most people felt that this year's Oscars had divided the pork a little too much. At the same time, many people complained that Eric had missed the Best Adapted Screenplay award for Knowing a Woman by Scent. Under such circumstances, Driving for Miss Daisy, which had taken the Best Adapted Screenplay award from Knowing a Woman by Scent, became the target of attack. Driving for Miss Daisy was a film released by Warner Pictures. Warner was currently the strongest of the 7 major Hollywood film companies. Therefore, after Driving for Miss Daisy caused controversy, Warner's counterattack came quickly. This incident caused a small stir in the newspapers, and even overshadowed the limelight of several major awards. Chapter 302. As for the controversy over the award, the Academy did not respond as usual. Everyone knew that no matter who the award was given to, it would always cause controversy. A few days after the Oscars, Firefly's first movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, was released after the turmoil at the beginning of the year. Many people were paying attention to the movie with all kinds of emotions. Although Drowning Dog had also achieved good box office results some time ago, that movie's box office was much larger due to Eric's influence. However, it was still considered small. Because Eric was very optimistic about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Robert Shea had collected as many as 2,000 screens for the movie. This was already the limit of Firefly's ability. If necessary, the 7 major film companies could collect more than 3,000 screens. Moreover, even if the box office of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was much better than the original plan after its release, it would be difficult to increase the number of screens. If the box office was not satisfactory, then hundreds of screens could be removed next week. Therefore, this release attracted the attention of most people in and out of the Hollywood circle. If Firefly encountered a failure this time, there would be a lot of people who would gloat or even kick them when they were down. However, because the box office results in his previous life were guaranteed, and the scale of the promotion was much larger than in his previous life, Firefly had invested more than $6 million in the promotion budget for the movie. This did not include the production cost of 2,000 copies. Therefore, Eric was not as nervous as Robert Shea or Jeffrey. Although he attended the premiere, Eric hid in the side as a guest this time. He gave the opportunity to show his face to the creators of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. At this time, he was discussing the preparations for Basic Instinct with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, if you can't find a suitable actor in Hollywood, I suggest you go to Europe to try. Just like the movie Prague Love a few years ago. The director of that movie chose European actors because most of the Hollywood actors were too conservative and unwilling to act in them. Jeffrey looked at Robert Shea, who was passionately speaking on stage. He shook his head and said, "Eric, I'm not worried about this. There are many other things. For example, the director Paul Van Hoven, who you recommended, recently accepted a big production starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. He doesn't want to pay any attention to Basic Instinct at all. Moreover, the budget is also a very big problem. I asked someone to do a detailed budget according to the script you gave, and the final result is that the cost of this movie is at least $30 million, which is far more than the $20 million budget you gave. Most importantly, there's the issue of rating. The few scenes you designed are really too much. It's very easy for it to be rated NC-17. We don't have the ability to interfere with the rating committee right now. Once it's rated NC-17 and scheduled for screening in restricted theaters, then this movie will definitely lose everything." Eric scratched his head in distress. He knew that Jeffrey was telling the truth. The American Film Rating Committee was completely controlled by the 7 major film companies. Many people had analyzed that some movies with exactly the same scenes would be rated, or if they were produced by the 7 major film companies. But those that weren't produced by the 7 major film companies would be rated NC-17. Eric clearly remembered that in his previous life, Meg Ryan had starred in Naked Mutilation in order to find a breakthrough. Because it was released by a major film company, some of the scenes in that movie could be rated as IV, but it was rated R instead. If this movie was not rated NC-17 in the future, then the 7 major film companies must have collectively gone crazy. Although there was still the possibility of re-rating by modifying the plot. In that case, there would definitely be a lot of changes in the plot, and the box office results would be difficult to predict. After thinking for a while, Eric knew that he had no other choice. He could only say, "How about this, Jeffrey? Contact the 7 major film companies, and see which one is willing to cooperate. Choose one that is more beneficial to us." Then about you being the screenwriter. In that case, there's no way to hide it. Just use my real name. Anyway, I'm not even 20 years old now. Writing such a script would just make people think that I'm young and frivolous. If I hide it, I bet that no matter what the purpose of those guys is, they will definitely do everything possible to reveal it. Jeffrey shook his head helplessly. "Eric, I really don't understand why you have to make such a movie. I don't see how this movie is outstanding." "Then just read the script a few more times," Eric joked. "Do you know who killed with a 38 now?" Jeffrey shook his head. "If you tell me what Beth said after she was shot by the male lead Nick, I'll be 100% sure." Eric kept him in suspense. "Maybe it was I was wrong, I let you down, I love you, or something like that. I think the most unlikely thing is I love you." "The most likely thing is I was wrong," Jeffrey said. Eric was stunned. In fact, this sentence was originally, "I love you." However, Eric felt that it would be difficult to say, "I love you," before death when you were shot by the person you loved deeply without hesitation. Therefore, when he was writing the script, Eric made a small change and only left the word "I" for the audience to guess. Just like in Shock Island, leaving some suspense would be more beneficial to the box office. On the stage, after the main creators of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles took turns to give their speeches, the movie started to play. When he saw the scene on the screen again, Eric could not help but frown slightly. This was a strong B-grade Hong Kong movie. Although the total cost of $13 million was definitely a super big production for a Hong Kong movie, it could barely be considered a medium cost in Hollywood. Coupled with the fact that some special effects had to be used in the movie, the result was obvious. For example, in one of the scenes when a group of people were fighting, a criminal with a knife cut a wire. Even if you did not have the ability to do lighting effects here, you should at least add some electric sizzling sound. But in the end there was none. The criminal's body only trembled a few times, and it looked like he had been electrocuted. It looked a little funny. Of course, this was mainly because Eric's appetite had been spoiled by the special effects blockbusters in his previous life. Although Eric kept frowning, the audience in the movie theater who attended the premiere laughed from time to time at the words and martial arts moves of the four Ninja Turtles. Some of them even exclaimed softly. When the main creators of the movie, who were still a little nervous, heard these noises, they all breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps it was because of the budget of the movie, or perhaps it was the usual practice of Hong Kong movies, but the movie was only 90 minutes long. It finished very quickly. Before the lights were turned on, there was a warm applause in the movie theater. A wonderful sci-fi action movie. Although many parts of the production are not satisfactory, with a $13 million investment, this is an outstanding movie. The mockery of the Renaissance characters in the movie from time to time is hilarious. The movie's action design also has many points. It's worth watching. After the premiere, all kinds of reviews came in. Because of Firefly's vigorous publicity and public relations, the overall reviews of the movie were very positive. Many newspapers gave it high marks. Although there were a few fierce criticism articles from time to time, they did not cause much of a stir. Although the 7 major movie companies did not want to see the movie succeed, in the face of Firefly's relentless publicity, no one would spend hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to discredit the movie. What's more, the 7 major movie companies were not particularly optimistic about the movie. Otherwise, Fox would not have refused to release Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles after watching the movie. Under the attention of many people, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles earned $25 million in the first weekend box office in 2,000 theaters in North America 3 days later, which surprised many people. And Fox, who had misjudged again, fired several executives in a short time. Including the Golden Jade Alliance incident, Fox was inevitably ridiculed by many media outlets. In the face of this situation, Fox could not speak of his bitterness. After a full week, the box office of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for the first week was released, reaching $32 million. Seeing this result, many of the media outlets that were still complaining were silent. People in the Hollywood circle also realized that after the storm at the beginning of the year, Firefly was not affected in any way. The news that Eric was the first to be optimistic about the movie was inevitably revealed, which once again caused a heated discussion in the Hollywood circle. In addition to the few movies that Eric participated in, including Steel Magnolias, this was also the second time that a movie that others were not optimistic about but was optimistic about by Eric was a big success. For a time, many people began to inquire about which movies Eric was optimistic about. Therefore, a series of copyrights that Eric asked Drew to purchase before the new year once again attracted the attention of many people. Because the little girl was not in a hurry, Eric only bought more than half of the more than 20 copyrights listed. After the 2 copyrights that were being negotiated were discovered, all the powerful film companies in Hollywood joined in the competition, and the copyright owners were also waiting for a good price. In this case, Eric could only ask Drew to stop the acquisition of copyrights. Although there were still a few movies that had not been obtained, if he made a move now, it would definitely be a crazy scramble. The certainty of getting it was extremely low. Moreover, the adaptation rights of several movies that Eric valued the most, such as Charlie's Angel, Mission Impossible, and Bourne's Identity, had already been obtained. Of course, these were all in the future. After the success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the person with the most complicated feelings was undoubtedly Robert Shea. After all, if Robert Shea could wait for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to be released in the first half of the year, then the new line would be completely different. Chapter 303. In an old-fashioned prison on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a man and a woman were confronting each other through a glass door. Then let's do this test. The woman in a rustic brown striped coat, but with a very beautiful face, tried to persuade him. No, but I'll make you happy. I'll give you a big chance. What? The woman asked doubtfully. The man in a prisoner's uniform behind the glass window interrupted the woman and said, "It's a promotion. Listen, Chris darling, you should reflect on yourself and find out about my former patient, Miss Murphy." The woman tried hard to seize the initiative of the conversation, and in the end, she barely managed to get a word in. But in the face of the aggressive man on the other side of the glass door, the woman's efforts seemed insignificant and were completely suppressed. "I believe Miles won't act up so soon, although he's a madman," the man said. Suddenly, he raised his voice and shouted at the woman, "Now go!" The woman was so scared that she shrank her neck slightly and left in a hurry amidst the frantic shouts of the prisoners in the other rooms of the prison. Cut. Very good. It's impeccable, Jonathan Dime, who was standing behind the monitor with his headphones on, shouted excitedly. He had been watching Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins's performance. At the same time, the crew members around him also applauded enthusiastically. "Mr. Hopkins, your performance was great." Elizabeth, who was still clapping, complimented Anthony Hopkins after he walked out of the room. "Thank you, Miss Murdoch. In fact, Miss Foster's performance was also very good. Without her cooperation, I don't think I could have gotten into the groove so quickly. Mr. Hopkins, I have to admit that I'm not as good as you in this part," Jodie Foster said with a smile as she took a towel from her assistant and wiped the sweat off her face. "Okay, you're all great, so I think we should stop complimenting each other," Drew, who was standing next to Elizabeth, said with a smile. Then he looked at Jonathan Dime and said, "Mr. Dime, is that all for today's shooting?" "Yes, Miss Barrymore. We've finished filming the scenes here. Although we still have more than an hour, we won't be able to prepare for the next scene," Jonathan Dime said as he came over. He then instructed his assistant to prepare for the next scene. Drew looked at his watch and then said to everyone, "Then Julia and I will leave first. We're flying to Los Angeles at 4:30. "Of course, no problem. I'll get the driver to take you to the airport," Jonathan Dime said immediately. It was already the fourth day of filming for The Silence of the Lambs in Pennsylvania. As TG Films' first movie, Elizabeth, Drew, and Julia attached great importance to it. Therefore, they arrived here before filming started. The three of them had already stayed in Pittsburgh for a week. Because the three women were the producers of this movie, Jonathan Dime was originally worried that the three of them would criticize the filming. However, after the filming began, this worry quickly dissipated. First of all, Elizabeth and Drew seemed to be following the crew around with the attitude of learning. Not only did they not cause any trouble, but they also helped from time to time. Among the three of them, Julia, who was the most famous, was the least worrisome. She did not care about anything at all. As a popular Hollywood actress, Julia had her own work to do. Although Drew wanted to stay with Elizabeth on the set, she was still a minor. No one dared to let her stay on the set for too long. In addition, Eric still did not know that Drew was the producer of The Silence of the Lambs. When he heard that the girl was here, he specially called her and told her not to play too much and to return to Los Angeles as soon as possible. Therefore, Drew and Julia booked today's plane tickets together and planned to return to Los Angeles. As the main producer, Elizabeth would continue to follow the crew until the filming ended. In the lobby of the Pittsburgh airport, Elizabeth hugged the girl and then hugged Julia. Under Drew's slightly raised eyebrows, Elizabeth gently kissed the girl's lips before saying, "Goodbye, Julie and Drew. Have a safe trip." "Goodbye." The two women waved at Elizabeth and walked to the boarding gate with their assistants. After the Boeing plane entered the stratosphere, Drew unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at Julia, who was sitting next to him and flipping through a fashion magazine in boredom. "Julia, you and Liz." Julia, who was originally a little absent-minded, suddenly heard the girl say this and a look of panic flashed across her face. "You? What do you mean?" The girl pursed her lips and said, "You two are staying in the same hotel room for the next few days. Don't forget, I'm next door and can hear a lot of things." "We're just—" Julia wanted to find a reason to refute, but Drew quickly patted Julia's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, I won't discriminate against you." Julia opened her mouth and looked at the girl's serious face. She couldn't help but ask, "Don't you think it's weird?" After hearing Julia's question, Drew immediately showed a strange expression. "You guys are already like that, do you still think it's weird?" Julia nodded honestly. "If it's weird, then why are you still like Liz?" Drew asked curiously. "I don't know, I just think, well, it's not bad being with Liz. Liz also thinks it's not bad, so that's how it is." The girl didn't understand what Julia was trying to say, but she realized that the girl hadn't completely changed her sexual orientation yet. It was just that for some reason, she temporarily became a fake couple with Elizabeth. How can this be? She has to change. It's best if she becomes disgusted when she sees someone. Oh no, when she sees men. Thinking of this, Drew rolled his eyes and said, "Julia, this is just an inherent concept that you've formed since you were young. There are countless gay people in Hollywood, so you don't have to feel any psychological burden. I think you and Liz are a good match, and Liz is also very considerate to you, isn't she?" Hearing Drew say the word gay, without any scruples, Julia's eyes flashed a few times in panic. How could she understand the little girl's thoughts? She thought that the little girl was really thinking for her. After thinking about what Drew said, she felt that it made sense, so she breathed a sigh of relief and nodded slightly. Perhaps the little girl felt that the fire wasn't big enough, so she continued to fan the flames. "Julia, maybe you don't know, but Jodie Foster is actually gay too." This time, Julia was really shocked. She turned her head to look at the little girl and asked in disbelief, "No, that's not possible, right?" Drew nodded with certainty and said, "This is absolutely true, but Jodie is more low-key. However, a lot of people know that she's gay. Apparently, it was because of Sinclair's assassination of the president that she was completely disappointed in men, so she changed her sexual orientation." Julia nodded softly and didn't say anything else. She looked at the magazine in front of her again. A few hours later, the plane landed at the Los Angeles airport. Because of the time difference, it was still evening in Los Angeles. Drew and Julia got into two separate cars. After dropping off her assistant in the city center, the little girl directly ordered the driver to drive to Malibu Point Manor. "Hey Ron, it's me, open the door," Drew directly shouted at the security guard at the gate when they arrived at the manor. The security guard quickly opened the gate when he heard Drew's voice. Then he greeted, "Miss Barrymore, you're back?" "Yes, is Eric home?" "Yes, Mr. Williams has been staying at home for the past 2 days," said the security guard named Ron. Looking at the suitcase Drew was pulling, Ron asked eagerly, "Miss Barrymore, do you want me to help you with your luggage?" "No need. Oh, by the way, why are you the only one here? Where's the other one?" Drew looked suspiciously at the empty security booth behind Ron and warned, "Don't tell me the other one isn't here." No, Miss Barrymore, George went to the toilet. He'll be back soon," Ron quickly explained for his colleague, then pointed not far away. "Look, he's back." The little girl followed Ron's gaze and saw the other security guard. Then she nodded and did not say anything else. She pulled the small suitcase and walked to the villa. Along the way, the servants who were in charge of the manor greeted the little girl from time to time. As Eric could not be bothered with these trivial matters, most of the people here were selected by Drew. Therefore, although Drew was not staying here during this period of time, everyone still treated her as the mistress of the house when she came back. This attitude made the little girl very satisfied. Walking into the living room of the villa, The little girl looked around before saying, "Eric, I'm back." A moment later, Nicole walked out of the kitchen with her hair standing up on the back of her head and a small apron around her waist. She looked like she was at home. "Hi, Drew." Nicole greeted and stepped forward to take the little girl's luggage. Only then did Drew react. She sized up Nicole's outfit, and a sense of hostility arose in the little girl's heart. "Why are you here?" After all, Nicole had been with Drew for a few months. How could she not hear the hostility in the little girl's voice? However, the little girl was not displeased. She brushed the scattered strands of hair from her temples and casually said, "I happen to have nothing to do these days, so I came over to stay for a few days." It's because of the female lead of Ghost, right? You really put in a lot of effort. I don't have a choice. I don't want to be someone who's so spoiled that she'll grant every request. I can only fight for it myself. The little girl snorted again, but there was a hint of pride on her face. Since Eric didn't take the initiative to ask, it means you're not the female lead he wants at all. Chapter 304. Nicole shrugged noncommittally and said, "It doesn't matter. I've also received a lot of offers. I just happened to live here and asked Eric to help me pick one. His vision has now spread throughout Hollywood. I heard that part of the credit goes to you." Hearing Nicole's words, Drew glared at the girl unhappily and asked, "Where's Eric?" "In the study discussing something with a guest. Help me put my things in my room." The girl pushed the suitcase in her hand in front of Nicole and ran to the door of the study. Nicole looked at the small suitcase in front of her and frowned slightly. Soon, a mysterious smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She pulled the suitcase up and walked up the stairs. At the door of the study on the basement floor, Drew quickly pressed a few keys on the password lock. The door opened automatically. She walked down the spiral stairs, but did not see Eric. Drew immediately realized that Eric must be in the study on the second floor. There were so many private things like scripts in this room. Unless it was someone close to him, Eric would not have brought them in. She walked up the stairs to the study on the second floor. Pushing the door open, Drew saw Eric sitting opposite a brown-haired man, discussing something. Hearing the movement behind the door, the brown-haired man turned his head. Drew saw the man's face clearly. She had a good memory and recognized him at a glance. The middle-aged man was the boss of the publishing house where Eric published Jurassic Park, Michael Klaus. "Hello, Mr. Klaus." Michael Klaus saw Drew call out his name without hesitation and stood up in surprise. "Hello, Miss Barrymore. I didn't expect you to remember me. We only met once at the party last year, right?" Drew shook hands with Michael Klaus, then turned around the desk and threw herself into Eric's arms like a swallow returning to its nest. She rubbed against the man's face and said, "Eric, I missed you so much." Eric smiled and stroked the girl's hair. "All right, stop fooling around. The guests are here. Go and make us another pot of coffee. We just finished it." You've just come back and you're already ordering me around," the little girl muttered in dissatisfaction, but she still jumped up and walked out briskly. "Drew has always been like this. Sorry for making a fool of himself," Eric explained helplessly as he looked at the dumbfounded Michael Klaus. Michael Klaus smiled awkwardly and said, "No, nothing. Let's continue talking about The Matrix." "Eric, I think this novel is too short. It's only about 50,000 words. Many of the things written are wrong. I think it would be better if it could be expanded to 200,000 words." "I want to do that too, Michael, but you should know that I don't have that much time now. It's already good enough to write 50,000 words. Also, you should know that I wrote this novel only for the movie rights," Eric said. The two of them were talking about the famous The Matrix. Because of the release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and some other things in the past, Eric's vision for movies had been spread all over Hollywood. As an industry with high risks, it was inevitable that Hollywood filmmakers would be fascinated by this kind of thing. Therefore, Drew's silent acquisition of the movie rights was criticized. After this incident, Eric's original plan to get the script of The Matrix from the Carpenter brothers could no longer be carried out. In his previous life, The Matrix had only appeared in 1999, and the concept of The Matrix was at most some random ideas in the minds of the two brothers who were still working as carpenters and painters. Eric did not hesitate to write it out, and made some specious changes, which made the novel and the movie a lot different. However, the main storyline did not change much. Although it was only about 50,000 words, it was enough to fill the hole, and he would not have to worry about copyright issues in the future. Eric, actually, this story is quite interesting, so I think maybe I can find someone to expand the story to 200,000 words. Don't worry, there won't be any problems with the copyright. I promised to sign a complete contract with the hired gunman. Eric immediately shook his head. Michael, finding a gunman is a very risky thing. In the future, when the benefits reach a certain level, I promise that the gunman will jump out, so I won't take this risk. As the two of them were talking, Drew came in with a pot of coffee. He poured coffee for the two of them, and curiously picked up the manuscript between them. He asked, "What are you talking about?" The Matrix, a very interesting name." Michael Klaus looked at Drew, who was sitting on the sofa next to him with the manuscript, and looked at Eric helplessly. "It's okay, let's continue talking." Eric gave Michael Klaus a reassuring look. He knew that Michael Klaus was worried that the girl would hear something she shouldn't and spread the news. Michael Klaus said, "Then Eric, since you don't agree, forget it. I want to ask about Dark War. Have you ever thought of turning this story into a novel?" Michael, the copyright of Dark War is jointly owned by Firefly and Columbia. The first book in the series got more than $400 million at the global box office. Then, with the sequels, the box office value may exceed $1 billion. With such a huge amount of money involved, Columbia won't agree to turn this series into a novel for a few $100,000, or at most a few $1 million in royalties. That's a pity. Michael Klaus shook his head and chatted with Eric about the details of the publication of The Matrix. Michael Klaus politely declined Eric's invitation to stay for dinner, and said goodbye. Eric walked Michael Klaus out of the villa, and waited for him to drive to the gate of the manor, before returning to the villa. "Wow, Eric, how did you come up with this? You can even do this." As soon as they entered the living room, the little girl excitedly waved the script in her hand, and said to Eric. Eric snatched the manuscript of The Matrix back from the girl and asked, "When did you come back?" "I came here as soon as I got off the plane." Drew smiled and hugged Eric's arm, then followed Eric into the basement study. "Then why did you go to the set of Silence of the Lambs? It's fine if you're filming in Los Angeles, but you actually went to Pennsylvania?" You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.